Good afternoon. We're back in session and we'll now proceed to the Student Learning and Achievement Committee led by Ms. Jill Kamnitz. Ms. Kamnitz.
Thank you, Chair Davis. I share the responsibility for the work of this committee with my colleague, Dr. Olivia Oxendine. We have a somewhat brief agenda for SLA standards today. We start with one action item, which is a state board policy amendment relating to the organization and structure of the governor's school, policy ACIG-001. I'll remind you, we talked about this last month. The updates to this policy will provide clarity on the leadership structure of the program and ensure that the tools necessary to support the program are developed by the staff, and it also broadens the membership of the Board of Governors to include participation of school counselors. Nothing has changed since last month. If there are any questions, Ms. Shaw Coltrane is here to answer them. But seeing none, so this will be an action item tomorrow. So we will move on to several discussion items. SLA 2 is our annual report from the State Advisory Council on Indian Education, or SACE. And I believe Dr. Locklear is going to start us.
Good afternoon, Chair Davis, Vice Chair Duncan, esteemed members of the State Board, Superintendent Troy, and all other stakeholders present. On behalf of the State Advisory Council on Indian Education, we are pleased to present this vital work, the 2024 Annual SACE Report. This report serves as a comprehensive examination of critical issues and emphasizes the continued need of attaining educational equity for American Indian students. The SACE mission and vision drives the work that we do to improve educational outcomes for American Indian students. The 2024 report theme is Our Children, Our Data, Our Legacy. This theme encapsulates the essence of our collective efforts to advocate for the educational well-being of our communities and underscores the importance of preserving our cultural legacy through data-driven initiatives aimed at supporting our children's future. This work aligns to your education equity resolution goal to eliminate opportunity gaps by 2025. The report includes overall state-level findings by grade level for reading, math, and science, EOG findings by gender, and overall state findings for cohort graduation rates, dropout rates, and the suspension data. The report cover is beautiful. Our children counts, and so does the data. The data drives legacy, and the data is not so quite beautiful. This page introduces a broad comparison across major educational performance indicators, including EOG tests in reading and math, EOC tests in Math 1, English 2, and biology, the 4-year cohort graduation rate, and dropout rates. The data starkly highlights the performance gaps between American Indian students and white students, showing significantly lower percentages in EOG and EOC outcomes and a higher dropout rate among American Indian students. Rather than me unpacking this data for you, you're all scholars, I'm going to give you a minute just to take one good hard look at the data. Specifically, the difference percentage points. So this really draws attention to the critical disparities in educational outcomes between American Indian students and their white counterparts, as evidenced in the data presented. The significant gaps in proficiency rates across subjects like reading, math, and science, coupled with the disparities in graduation and dropout rates, underscores the urgent need for action. Achieving educational equity for American Indian students requires a multifaceted approach culturally relevant resources, and implementing culturally responsive teaching practices, and the hiring of more Indigenous representatives. By addressing these systemic barriers and advocating for policy changes at all levels, we can work toward creating a more inclusive and equitable education system that honors the diverse cultural backgrounds and identities of all students. Our next slide shows the 3-year snapshot of grades 3 through 5 EOG reading across demographic groups in the state. In grade 3, we do see a positive increase in EOG reading proficiency rates among American Indian students, though they still lag behind their white counterparts. Similarly, when we look at grades 4 through 7, there's notable improvement for American Indian students, but a persistent gap remains. In grade 8, rates for American Indian students have consistently increased, but disparities continue to persist. These trends highlight both progress and ongoing disparities. Moving forward, it is crucial to implement targeted strategies to ensure equitable educational opportunities for all students. On our next slide, in grades 3 to 5, there's been improvement in EOG math rates for American Indian students, but gaps with white students persist. In grades 6 to 8, similar trends are observed with improvements in EOG math performance among American Indian students, yet those disparities remain. This underscores the need for targeted interventions to ensure equitable math instruction. And on our next slide, in grade 5, American Indian students have shown consistent growth in science scores over the years, yet those disparities persist. Moving to grade 8, American Indian students have demonstrated improvement in the EOG science scores, particularly in 2021-2022, but those disparities are still notable. Overall, American Indian students are performing better in science, suggesting some positive strides in science education equity. Continued data reform and efforts are necessary to ensure quality science education for all. In Math 1, American Indian students have shown consistent improvement over the years, although disparities persist. Similarly, in biology, American Indian students have demonstrated growth, yet significantly disparities remain. In English 2, American Indian students have maintained performance levels, and despite this, disparities persist. The 4-year cohort graduation rate for American Indian students declined by 5 points from the previous year, standing at 80.3%. American Indian students trail the state average of 86.5%, a 6.2 difference. Furthermore, compared to peer subgroups, American Indians fall behind with a gap of 10 points below white students, 4 points below Hispanic students, and 0.7% below their black peers. The dropout rate for all subgroups decreased during the 2022-2023 school year, with the American Indian population dropout rate decreasing by 1.28 percentage points. A moderate decrease is noted in the dropout rates for all other subgroups. The dropout rate for American Indian students in 2022-2023 was 2.18%, which is higher than that of their white peers. However, their American Indian students' dropout rate fell below their black and Hispanic peers. Also, the dropout rate among American Indian students continues to be higher than the state's average rate. When comparing the dropout rates for male and female students, the data shows that male students in all racial and ethnic groups tend to drop out at a higher rate than female students. It's crucial for identifying groups at higher risk of dropping out and tailoring support systems to address this need. Based on the presented data, SACE strongly recommends and supports the 2021 SACE recommendations, and they're outlined in Appendix A of the report. Additionally, we highlight Appendix B, which contains the circles of reflection completed by Dr. Priscilla Maynor and her team. And when she completed that, she did include DPI, senior leadership, SACE members, educators, and tribal leadership. Appendix J brings attention to the issue of American Indian mascots, revealing that 34 schools in North Carolina still use American-themed logos or mascots. And finally, in Appendix K, we provide guidance for the elimination of mascots in North Carolina public schools, as it's a crucial step in moving forward. Here we have our suspension data. In 2022-2023, the number of short and long-term suspensions increased for all subgroups. The number of short-term suspensions of American Indian students increased by 1,385. The long-term suspension rate increased as well. So I do want to highlight this pathway forward in that the SACE supports the proposal of and will advocate for legislation that will prohibit the use of offensive American Indian mascots by North Carolina schools and institutions of higher ed, with agreed upon exceptions, such as the school has an existing agreement with a state or federally recognized tribe, the school is operated by a tribe with the approval of a tribe, or the school develops a written agreement with a tribe approved by the governing body of the tribe to use a mascot that is culturally affiliated with the tribe if they also maintain a relationship. As we move forward supporting this legislation, and in the meanwhile, we're really focusing our efforts in increasing the academic achievement of American Indian students. Based on the quantitative data presented in the report, we have arrived to our 2024 recommendations. Please note that priority 3 from the pilot program from the Circles of Reflection by Dr. Priscilla Maynor again involved DPI senior leadership, and it focuses on tribal consultation and sovereignty. This recommendation underscores the importance of engaging and collaborating with tribal communities to ensure that their voices and perspectives are incorporated within educational policies and practices. By prioritizing tribal consultation and sovereignty, we can work towards creating a more inclusive and equitable education system for all students, particularly American Indian communities. Again, our recommendations are aligned to your State Board of Education equity resolution goals. To align with the State Board's vision of equity and opportunities and honor the financial commitment made by our North Carolina legislators, SACE advocates for the prompt recruitment and hiring of the state-level Director of American Indian Education, which was approved last year. This individual should possess a deep understanding and strong connections with our 8 tribes of North Carolina and relevant organizations. We also request an interview committee of cross-government agency employees who have a demonstrated knowledge, understanding of, and relationship with North Carolina tribes and communities. And SACE also recommends that the State Board of Education and State Superintendent support our previous suggestions and federal ESSA requirements for tribal consultation. To achieve this, provide strong backing for the state-level American Indian Education Director. One, that director would engage in DPI senior leadership meetings for agency-wide collaboration, which fulfills that tribal consultation and meaningful collaboration. Offer training and guidance to Title VI grant-receiving LEAs to maximize support for American Indian students, and to establish a formalized process for tribal consultation to fulfill ESSA obligations. This initiative would elevate DPI beyond compliance, ensuring that intentional practices that are directly impact American Indian performance. We also recommend that the agency collaborates with SACE and American Indian leaders on legislative agendas and funding requests for policies benefiting American Indian students in North Carolina. And to continue to gather feedback from SACE and American Indian community on state standards and textbooks. The Science Committee actually reached out to us 3 to 4 years ago when revising their standards, which may be why those performance scores increased. We extend appreciation to the North Carolina State Board of Education, the North Carolina Commission of Indian Affairs, DPI staff, the National Comprehensive Center, and SACE members for their invaluable contributions. Special gratitude to Dr. Susan Silver, who serves as the liaison to SACE, alongside Dr. Briggs and Ms. Richardson, and our State Board of Education liaison, Dr. Olivia Oxendine, for her unwavering commitment, energy, and passion. Their collective efforts enable us to produce this comprehensive report annually. Again, it's beautiful, but when we unpack the data, it's not so beautiful. Thank you to all the individuals involved. Again, this is our children. This is our data. I have a 6-year-old first grader, and so this is our legacy. At this time, I'm happy to entertain any questions or comments. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Locklear. Any questions?
Not a question, but I just wanted to, first of all, thank you for coming and delivering this report to us and for sharing the data. And just to provide a little context for the gains that we've seen, we're so proud of all of our student groups because they're all seeing gains. Our gains are not, of course, moving as quickly as we would like, but not all states are seeing gains. And so while we are right now not, as you will hear Dr. Ryan talk about when we look at early literacy data, for example, while we are not closing gaps with our Hispanic, African American, and American Indian students, we are not falling behind. And this is unfortunately a pattern that many states are seeing, where they are continuing to fall behind because during the pandemic and coming out of the pandemic. And so we are, I think everyone in this room, committed to ensuring that not only do we continue to see the gains that have been made, but that the gains become such that they are closing gaps. Because unfortunately, lots of groups were started really far behind and which is why we're not closing gaps, but we absolutely must continue to see gains that are enough that gaps begin to close.
And so I would ask that the agency actually uses this report to drive and impact the instruction that's taking place. We thank DPI and the agency for the increase that has taken place, but those disparities are still very significant, and they have been for years and decades. And so it's a shame that, first of all, I have to continue to push the issue of us making culturally responsive decisions, but it's still at the forefront of education. So I just ask that the agency continue to make data-informed decisions to close those opportunity gaps for our students, because they matter, and again, they're a legacy. And when I think about it, I'm always personal in that I live in Robeson County. I'm a product of Robeson County, and I am preparing my child to be globally competent, but not every child is in a household like that. And so that's where that equity comes in.
Dr. Ockendine.
I want to thank the hard work of the Superintendent Truitt and others in the room, Stacey especially, and over in the General Assembly, from Jerry Lowry, for after 35 years, we now have a position back in play that is going to be dedicated to the achievement of American Indian students. I don't know where it's probably ready to be out there and announced, I'm not sure, but it's very close to it. So that has been nothing but uphill work, folks. 35 years ago, the position went away, and now it's back. And we're so optimistic. Stacy, I know this board can join me, the DPI can join me, the Superintendent Truitt and others. The Commission of Indian Affairs, I think Executive Director Richardson was with us this morning. I don't know if he's still in the room, but welcome if you're here. But we're all 100% behind this position, and we're 100% more hoping and knowing that we will begin to continue to see the gap close.
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Lockwood.
Thank you.
Another item of discussion, SLA 3 is our update on the Excellent Public Schools Act mid-year assessment. Some good news here from Dr. Ryan, as she has brought us every time recently.
Good afternoon. Good afternoon. Okay, so we can pause that up. Good afternoon, Chair Davis, Vice Chair Duncan, Superintendent Truitt, members of the board, colleagues, and stakeholders. I am here to bring you the mid-year data as Ms. Kamnitz has shared. And on the first slide, you will see first we're going to begin with the celebration of the fact that we, as of this month, cohorts 1 and 2 are completely finished with their letters of professional development, and 36 out of 57 in cohort 3 are finished. So we have 21 districts remaining, and they will all finish by June. So lots has happened, and we continue to celebrate them, and you'll hear more about that as we go. But for the purpose of today, just a reminder of what DIBELS 8 is. You saw this at the beginning of the year, but it is a formative diagnostic reading screener. It is administered to all K-3 students, and their subcomponents that are short-timed measures, and it is face-to-face. There are 3 benchmarks, but more importantly, this data can be used to determine what gaps students have, not just necessarily deficits, but also where to move them forward next, so you can differentiate your instruction in real time. With that, Amplify also did some general implementation highlights for North Carolina, specifically related to the assessment fidelity, and what we've seen there continues to be at least 96% completion. Also around professional development participation from our educators, and the connections that we're having from our early literacy specialist coaches to what's happening with assessment and instruction, and the alignment and how all that's coming together. And last but not least, and most importantly, our student growth. So the key is the same reporting format that you've seen since we started sharing this in 21-22. The green users are your national users. The gray users are your North Carolina users. And there's a comparable measure size of 1.6 million for national users. So we'll start with our national users versus North Carolina trends at mid-year. You'll see that all North Carolina grade levels have continued to surpass the national data from beginning of year to mid-year, as was mentioned a little earlier, but this is by grade level. Your largest growth continues to happen in kinder, and I was asked the question, is that kind of normal for our kinders to come in around that proficiency level? And yes, that's what we've been seeing. So we want to make sure that we're trying to get those children as soon as possible and help recover some of what we're seeing as far as risk indicators when they come into our doors. And then grade 3 is comparable to the nation at only 2% above the nation. However, if you'll notice, as Superintendent Truitt had mentioned earlier, the national users declined by 1%. So while we're maintaining, and we would love to see that continue, it gets a little more complex, as we talked about, by the time you hit 3rd grade. And they're just finishing volume 2, your educators are, but we are continuing to maintain and hold steady while the national users are starting to decline based on that growth. And then when you look at the demographic trends, you'll see similar patterns to what you just heard. We continue to see gaps between our subgroups in North Carolina across the nation. However, we are increasing in each of those areas, and we're closing gaps compared to the nation in our American Indian and Hispanic subgroups. And we're outperforming national users when it comes to white, Asian, and Black and overall students right now. So we're starting to see gains there within our subgroups. And the main thing is we know the reality of what this data says and how we have a lot of work ahead, but we also know the reality of it's continuing to move forward, and we're seeing that trend increase. and it takes time. We're moving a ship, so it's gonna take us time. If you notice though, the Asian subgroup, they are at 80%, which aligns to that perfect MTSS triangle we talk about at 80% core. So they have reached the 80% mark. And when you look at overall students, you're seeing here that nearly 21,000 fewer students are below benchmark at mid-year, while over 34,000 students are at or above benchmark at mid-year. And then when you're looking back over time at our mid-year data, it indicates that we've had steady decreases in students who are below and well below benchmark, as well as a steady increase of students at and above benchmark. This change takes time, as I mentioned, but we're also making sure that we're continuing to move in the right direction. And this last slide, you'll see the same trends hold true at each grade level. When we compare 23-24 beginning of year to mid-year in North Carolina, until you reach grade 3. And that's where you're gonna see the skills become more complex, and those benchmarks seem to fall a little further behind. So what are we doing to be more proactive, to make sure we're not just checking off a list, and that we are truly starting with text and embedding all of those components from kindergarten on. You don't just start with phonics and phonemic awareness in kinder and not include the other things. It has to be all of it together. So how are we ensuring it's more than just checking off skills, and it's all embedded into one place? And so we're continuing to support those efforts with our youngest learners and make sure they are challenged, and we're looking at that data not only for our deficits but for growth for all students. The only other thing on the final slide I would note when we get to the questions is there was a follow-up request regarding pulling data for districts and schools. And so what we've done to date is we went ahead and put charts together for all districts that will have the state data. Our consultants work with our early literacy specialists. They have the state data in the chart. They'll have their own district data in those charts compared, and we'll hit the button today so that all of our early literacy specialists can share those with their Read to Achieve points of contact, and then they can share it internally. So they will have the charts, and then from there, the literacy specialists can determine which reports they need, but that'll start with the overall, so they can take that immediately and do what they need to with it. And I'll entertain questions.
Questions for Dr. Ryan? Questions?
I have three. Two of them are data related. First one is, we have about a quarter of the nation's, a little over a quarter of the nation's participants if you look to the nationwide. When we are looking at the statistics that measure us against the nation, are our numbers included in the nation's, or are our numbers taken out of the nation? So it's really North Carolina versus the other 1.2 million roughly in the rest of the nation.
Our numbers are taken out of the nation, so we're compared to those national users separate.
Second question, and I think we talked about this last time. Are there any other states that take it as an entirety, and if so, what does their data look like?
3, and we don't have access. We have asked for them to meet with us just to get a little more information, but they don't have to share that with us. And so we work with Amplifier, we're working with them to see if they would be willing to meet with us to see what's happening. I know one specifically we've talked to, it's not moving like our data is, but they've had a lot of leadership changes in their state, and they're having some overall changes even with literacy.
The third question, you said a couple of times that the third grade data is much more, well, it's not making the same gains as in the previous grades, but there's some nuanced reasons for that. Could you go into a little more detail on what the nuanced reasons would be for
Sure.
you're seeing those?
Absolutely. So there's a couple things. One thing that we're noticing, and this is what each of us would do, when you're teaching kindergarten and you're focused on kindergarten or your grade level, first grade or second, a lot of times we look at the isolated skills. And so we may just focus on those isolated skills and start with even our standards, which we know we have to focus on our standards. That's what we're to focus on. But really, we need to be thinking about starting with text, and academic standards would tell you the same. We need to start with the text and combine multiple skills in there rather than an isolated process for let's check off phonemic awareness, and then let's check off phonics, and then let's check off vocabulary. If those are all separate, it's really hard to take a passage and understand how to apply what you've learned. So it becomes, if you look at a scope and sequence, I'm going to focus on CVC words, and then I'm going to focus on the next skill and move forward. And if we continue to teach to that degree, we're going to see that we're teaching more toward a test and a checklist of I mastered it temporarily, but how do I take that to the next grade level and make sure that I've truly mastered it as opposed to mastering it for assessment purposes. So that's one piece. The other thing too is when you're looking at small groups and how you're prioritizing those, we're still closing gaps from students who had multiple deficits from COVID or for whatever reason. And as our teachers are learning how to address and prioritize those gaps, other gaps continue. So they continue to layer on top of the other. So the sooner we can catch those kiddos in kinder, the better off we are long term. And you should start to see that shift and change over time. The last thing I would say that I've just noticed recently in an extra report I've asked for from Amplify is, while I thought maybe some of the gaps happened in first grade, you know, when it gets a little harder at every grade level. What I noticed is nationally, all subgroups are pretty comparable, but we're seeing white students who are leaving kindergarten much higher than other subgroups, but they started pretty comparable. So we've got to dig in to see what's happening in kindergarten even that early to know why there's a deficit in those subgroups. And that was something I just looked at yesterday. So we'll continue to dig. And the more complex something is, if a child has background knowledge, you know, they don't have background knowledge, and you're focused on what vocabulary and which vocabulary and how do you prioritize that. And a lot of districts have just adopted new curriculum to learn how to align all of these pieces. So it's not just the letters professional development, but it's also now how do they apply what they're learning aligned to that curriculum, and if there's gaps, how do they supplement for that? So anything else I maybe have left out too, Superintendent Nelson?
That was an amazing response, thank you. And I would just add that we're seeing nationally, our third grade data looks like other Amplify users nationally. These trends are not specific to North Carolina with respect to third grade. But I would also say that third grade EOG is the only end of grade test that has climbed up above pre-pandemic levels. So we are seeing it, just inklings of starting to pay off in the third grade, but it's just taking so much longer than the other grades for all the reasons that you said.
Thank you so much, Dr. Ryan.
Thank you.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Oh.
I don't know if I'll ask these properly, so hopefully it'll make sense.
Okay.
The data on the slides that have beginning of year to middle of year with the greens and the grays, when we say that students are on track, is that a combination of the blues and the greens on the colored slides, and not on track is a combination of the reds and the yellows?
Let me look and see.
Yes.
So no, I think they're combined for
Right,
at and above,
yes,
yes,
okay.
but not for the other. They're broken down for you for below and well below.
Okay, and then is the data for the red, yellow, green, and blue available disaggregated by subgroup as well? And will that be a part of what's provided to districts?
So any of these reports, yes, it's available. Any of these reports can be pulled at any time by districts. They don't have to wait. So we think about the fact by the time we get this data, we meet with Amplify, we wait for all the national users to be finished. Really districts, I'm sure Donna can speak to this, and anybody else as far as elementary, but they've looked at this data and they've moved forward already.
Okay.
So to wait for us
Right.
would be a
And
delay.
that's sort of related to my last point, is they are able to tell at the district level, because being in a red, there's a range. Being in the yellow,
Correct.
there's a range.
Correct.
So seeing those ranges to see exactly what needs to be done in order to support and where kids actually are, that's available at the district level as well,
Correct.
and school level.
Absolutely. And remember, those ranges are really about the skills,
Right.
not the students, but the skills.
Right.
Yes. Yes, ma'am.
And I'll add, at the school level, what you're looking at is a composite score. We're able to get our down to components to know exactly like what our kids need to work on
Right.
in each component. And there's now a individual growth model for each kid. And so we have a trajectory now by each individual kid in Amplify to know what their goal is, to keep them, if they're blue, how to make them grow individually. And that's beautiful and changing our game to, as soon as we do middle of the year assessments, we're able to get an individualized goal for each kid for middle of the year. Middle of the year assessments happen, they have a goal for end of the year. So what Amplify is giving us, you're getting a small snapshot of what we're getting that is really changing our game and our trajectory. And I think everybody's right. It's important for us to note that we are on the right path with the work of Dr. Ryan and her team and all of you guys, and it has to continue, because what we're seeing will push North Carolina into the future to look back at EOG scores in the 70% again, like they were once upon a time when I began. And I believe that in my whole heart, that what we have done with letters, what we're doing to align with the curriculum, this will be what matters to our future. It is the most equitable practice there is to make proficient readers. And so I just believe we're on the right track, and always am grateful to you for that. Sorry, that's my soapbox moment.
Good way to end this discussion.
Yeah, I don't get on those very
And tomorrow
often.
gets even better when we get to celebrate with
And
districts.
what's
So,
happening
Yeah.
on the classroom level.
Thank you.
Dr. Ryan.
Quickly, we've got Dr. Day up here for 3 different separate items, but I think we'll be able to move through this fairly quickly. The first is SLA 4, which is permission to revise English language arts, or ELA standards.
Thank you. Good afternoon. We're here to ask your permission to move from the review phase into the revision phase for English language arts. So we'll do an overview of the current standards and the timeline that the team has gone through with the review. We'll talk about the data and the research that's taken place so far, and then we'll talk about next steps if given permission to revise. We always come back to our policy. So SCOS 012, this one talks about NCDPI shall facilitate the review of content standards every 5 to 7 years. Last time ELA came to the board, it was approved in 2017, and that standard course of study went into effect in 1819. We always have our procedures manual. It is linked there. The details of the process that the team went through with review and will go through with revision through all content areas, doesn't matter which content area it is, can be found in our procedures manual. We also like to do a reminder of standards versus curriculum. We are looking at standards today. So we are looking at the K-12 English Language Arts standards. So that's the what. What are students to know and be able to do by the end of the course or the grade level? Curriculum is the how. So text, lesson plans, activities, all of those are the how, and that is done at a local level. Just for a reminder of the K-12 standards, this is how they are organized at this time. We have 4 strands. We have reading. Within reading, we have literature, informational, and then reading foundational skills. We also have writing, speaking and listening, and language. From there, they are in clusters, which just means grouping. That's how the standards are kind of grouped together. So we have phonics and word recognition, and foundational skills, knowledge of language, and so on. From there, we have anchor standards, which are our college and career readiness goals after K-12. So each of the standards stair steps up to that anchor standard. And then we have our grade level specific standards that are specific to every grade. The difference is in high school, they're banded. So 9, 10 has a set of standards, and 11 and 12 have a set of standards. And they have a very distinct vertical progression to get them there. We also can't talk about standards if we don't talk about texts. And so grade level standards are always spiraling when it comes to English language arts. So you're coming back to those skills, back to those standards with increasingly complex text. And when we say increasingly complex, we don't mean necessarily harder. We're just increasing the complexity of pieces of that text. And so the triangle at the bottom are the 3 pieces of text complexity, with the quantitative, which is the lexile, typically in North Carolina, the qualitative, which are themes, vocabulary, things of that nature, and then the reader and task. And that's taking the student into consideration and what you're asking the student to do with that text. So we always talk about standards and text together because you cannot separate the two. For the review phase timeline, the team worked from July to September to do the research and the legislation review, and we released surveys. October and November of 2023, focus groups and interviews were completed, and those surveys closed. Towards the end of 2023 and the beginning of 2024, the DRC was selected, and their work began. And just last month, they finished up their work and their report. For our data, with this first piece of data collection, we had almost 90% of LEA responses, which in terms of other data collection and review is pretty high. We had over 1,200 stakeholder responses and 176 focus group participants and interviewees. Focus groups, we invite 2 participants per LEA, and we hold a separate for charters. And then interviews are typically ones that wouldn't be a part of those focus groups, so institutes of higher education, professors, things of that nature. Those are the ones. And we also do a parent, and we have a student interview as well in that process. The data review committee came together. They applied, first of all, and then we did a blinded selection. So we took off all identifiable information and we reviewed the applications against the criteria. And we had offices from across the agency help with that. One note for K-5, one of the requirements was that they were finished with letters to be a part of that work. So they were, we do references as well. They have to give us their current supervisor, and then we check references and they get to work. So their job is to explore the data and the research. They learn how to read the data, and then they complete a spreadsheet. There's a lot of data. So they take a look at the qualitative, the quantitative. OLR gives us the nice graphs, and they've organized the data, and then the DRC jump into that, and they come up with their recommendations and their findings, which are on the next slide. So they came with currently 6 recommendations or findings. These are just from the first survey. So as we go through the process, we have 3 drafts that come about. So these are just from our first go at our current standards. One is to align to current literacy research. As I mentioned, the last standards were approved in 2017. A lot of new research out there, so we want to make sure that that's aligned. Separate singular complex standards into separate distinct standards. There are some standards currently that have a semicolon, and it's a little confusing for teachers on how to assess or how to teach that and what that looks like. So in the data, there was an ask for that. More explicit language for what students are expected to know and be able to do. So just making sure that those verbs are real tight. And then in elementary, we have some terms around with guidance and support, which is very important for the younger students, but sometimes we get the question, what does that mean? How much guidance, how much support? So just being very explicit. There was a strong trend around revisiting the writing standards. They talked about the length, and then also about integrating grammar and handwriting, which are now currently separate, to make sure those are a part of the writing standards. More specificity on types, features, and structures of text, to just making sure that there are some standards that have or, so a text or a poem, or just using that word or. They want more specificity there. And then integrate language standards into other strands. They are currently separate. And so a current data finding is to integrate that, especially within writing. If approved, we would move into revision. So we would open the standards writing team applications in April and May. We would make those selections. Draft 1 would take place this summer, and then it would be released for feedback at least 30 days. And then we start the cycle with DRC and the writers again. Draft 2 is completed, Draft 2 is released, and then we are hopeful, very tentatively, that in early 2025, we would have a Draft 3 completed to bring to the board.
Dr. Day, I hope you noticed that you got thumbs up, enthusiastic
We're
over
so
here
excited.
on those recommendations.
They're so good.
So those 2 teachers are telling you that you're right on target, or that the data review committee is right on target. Any questions for Dr. Day? We've been through this process many times over the last few years, as Dr. Day well knows, but this one we're on track. We're doing this when we should be doing it.
Yes.
One question.
Yes.
Dr. Day, you guys presented, I think a couple of weeks back ago, was just talking with Leah about the AASH standards.
Yes.
Has there been any conversation around the writing standards
Yes.
in relationship to our AIU standards? Because I think that's gonna be a huge push for teachers across the board. And I think we have a chance to get in front of that in the same way that we did with the AI standards, in a way that will be super relevant to students, and give just sort of great foundation for classroom teachers.
Yes, absolutely. Some of the research that they've pulled, those conversations in the data, that has definitely come up and will be at the forefront for the writers.
Wonderful.
Dr. Oxenden.
I'm gonna go off script for it's still about standards, though. I wanna be absolutely sure as we can in this brief dialogue that we're having right here, that this takes me back to the helpful living standards, and I think draft 2 has been completed.
Draft
Is
2,
underway.
draft 2 has been completed. They're currently working on draft 3.
On draft 3, right, okay. I want to be sure that the DRC, as they work on draft 3, that committee is giving full attention to the general statute. It is 115C 81.30 that is very emphatic and unequivocal around abstinence education versus comprehensive sex education theories. So there is, I have a personal interest in that, or professional interest. We are a state board of education that's very committed to the whole notion of the whole child, and I can't think of a better way to demonstrate our commitment to the whole child than something that is a standards and education practices, and I won't even go toward philosophy, that is all about the physical, the mental, the emotional well-being of children. So I just needed to get that out. Superintendent.
So thank you for those comments. The current draft, draft 2, has been reviewed by our legal counsel and is compliant with the law. Regardless of what anyone else may tell you, multiple legal professionals within this agency have looked at that second draft, and it is compliant with the law. That doesn't mean that everyone is going to be satisfied with it, but it is compliant
It's
with statute.
compliant.
Yes,
Well, that's what's important.
yes,
Yes.
agreed.
Most important. Thank you so much.
All right, so, Dr. Day, you can just stay there.
Stay here.
I don't see any more questions, so let's go on to SLA 5, which is a policy amendment around the process for review, revision, and implementation of the North Carolina Standard Code of Study.
Yes.
So, we've been doing a lot of that, and this is, I think, really good news, so walk us through this.
Thank you. Yes, we're bringing forward an amendment to the policy that we talk about every month around the standards. So that's just a reminder of what the policy currently is. It outlines our process for standards review. On the next slide, you'll see some suggested changes. So this is what we would like to change if approved. One, we would like to replace information and technology standards with digital learning standards to update that language to align with our current digital learning standards. We'd like to specify that the helpful living standards include both health and physical education. We would also like to include a copy of the manual. Our internal procedures manual has guided the process through several content areas now, and we want to make sure that that is within the policy. We are also bringing forward a 10-year standards review and revision timeline, and we'll take a look at that timeline in just a moment. But this also includes notes on English language development, the North Carolina Success Standards, and the digital learning standards. These are the 3 areas currently that have adopted a national framework. ELD is WIDA, and so when those standards are updated, we will jump into our process to see if North Carolina still wants to stay with those national standards or if there needs to be some changes there. We also have a note there around the extended content standards. Previously, the extended content standards were created a year behind the general education standards. We are currently doing them in the same year together, so that general educators and extended content teachers have those discussions, so that there's content expertise and then extended content expertise for those standards. And we want to make sure that that's within the policy so that that continues. On the next slide, we'll take a look at the 10-year timeline. We've laid out all of the content areas that are within the Standard Course of Study policy SCOS 012 and laid it out so that we are falling within the 5 to 7 year timeline that is within the policy, but we are also not going to review 3 areas at a time going forward. In the next couple months, we will bring forward healthful living, arts, and world languages, and once we bring that forward, we are back to our 1, and you'll see 2 with computer science and math, which to us makes sense thinking about the content of computer science and mathematics. We will go back to our stair step of 1 in review, 1 in revision, so that it is not overwhelming for districts and teachers. A number of reasons of why we got behind, but we feel like this 10-year timeline will keep us on track for several years. So this, you'll see the first 5 years, and then the next slide gives you a look at the next 5 years, and you can see which areas will be in review, revision, installation, and then initial implementation each year.
And we are going to stick to that timeline.
We are going to stick to that timeline, yes.
Any questions for Dr. Day on
We'll
this,
all be dead.
on this policy amendment? John? All right, SBE 6 is another policy amendment, what? Oh,
Just
I'm
real quick.
sorry, yes.
I may not be looking in the right place, or maybe I need to refresh. Is the 10-year timeline that you just put up there in the document that is online?
The policy, it is, it doesn't look like a chart, it's just listed down below, but it is within the policy, yes.
And the request that had the slide about ensuring that you do both
Mhm.
the extended content standards and regular standards at the same time, that's in here too?
That's in there as well.
And then the last one,
Uh-huh.
as you do the English language arts standard course of study,
Mhm.
is there similar work with the ELL department and teachers on how you develop those? Or-
The English language development standards, so those were revised, we follow WIDA, so when their edition came out, we adopted those a couple years ago. So actually ELA, world languages and English language development are all in one section in our department, so they're one team. And so they work together very closely.
All right, finally, one last item, another policy amendment on the Global Educator Digital Badge criteria.
Yes, thank you. One last policy amendment. This is Global Educator Digital Badge Criteria, DBDG 001. It's been a while since we've taken a look at this policy. Currently, it lays out the criteria that teachers need to earn the digital badge. It talks about teachers documenting their goals, completing 100 hours of PD, and completing a capstone project. And then it also lists other educators that can earn the digital badge. This was last updated in 2015, and a lot has happened since 2015. So the history behind this is in 2011, the State Board had a Global Education Task Force, which Ruben and I have discussed several times, with the goal of assessing the state's effort to produce globally competitive graduates. And so out of that task force came a report in January of 2013. And within that report, we had 6 major findings and 5 commitments. And that is where that Global Educator Digital Badge came out of. So we were suggesting a few changes. One, we would like to make sure that the process is aligned to the professional teaching standards, the PISA Global Competence Framework, and then the Portrait of a Graduate Durable Skills. We feel like those 3 work very closely together when we're talking about global education. We would like to move towards more micro-credentials. So there would be 6 micro-credentials aligned to those 3 pieces above that. We would have a Canvas hub as opposed to, we have a very unfriendly hub right now, so we'd like to move to Canvas. And then we are going to provide options for evidence. Right now, it's only 100 hours of professional development, and we have heard from teachers that that's really hard to get, especially free professional development. And so we're going to give an option of evidence. It might be lesson plans, it may be student work, it may be videos, it may be professional development. But the important part will be that reflection and how that aligns with those 3 at the top and what that impact on student learning was within that evidence. Once they earn their 6 micro-credentials, they have the opportunity to create a portfolio, which is those micro-credentials, plus a reflection, which will give them a template on how that process has impacted their teaching. So how did it make their teaching better, more global within their classroom? Then they will earn their badge, and we will put resources, open education resources, on a global education hub so that all educators across the state can access.
Questions about the global badge? So I think we asked this question in committee, the number of people who have been able to access that credential has decreased over time.
It has. Over the last couple of years, it has decreased drastically. And so we were thinking of how to revitalize, and based on feedback that we've talked about, those that have earned or those that may have started or are thinking about starting, this is where that came from, these suggestions from those conversations.
Thank you so much, Dr. Day. And that concludes the student learning achievement.
Thank you, Ms. Kamnitz. We'll now move to the Educator Standards and Practice Committee led by Dr. Olivia Oxendine. Dr. Oxendine.
Thank you, Chair Davis. I am Olivia Oxendine. I chair this committee. Joining me in the leadership role is Dr. Donna Tipton-Rogers. This month, I'm going to begin with 3 action items and briefly do just a brief overview of ES&P 1. This is a report that came to our attention last month, presented by Dr. Seiberg for discussion. It's coming to us today, and we will vote on it tomorrow. This is the report is a standard report, annual report that is presented to the General Assembly on the Educator Preparation Program and report card. Some highlights of that report is that we know that the dashboard consists of 9 data point categories. We also learned from Dr. Seiberg that we do have 55 EPPs. That would be our private as well as our state UNC systems. And I also believe that includes our university without, I call it University Without Walls, but we're talking about the non-traditional brick and mortar schools. Okay, so those institutions or those programs are included in the 55 total. We have close to 16,000 students enrolled in the EPPs. That does represent a 10% decline during the 21-22 year. However, over a 10-year period, it represents a 43% increase. So as of 2022-23, there were a little bit over 5,000 students enrolled in our system of EPPs. So that is coming, again, as I'm repeating myself, that's coming tomorrow for a vote. Any questions, comments? Did I leave anything out? Very good. We will go to the next item, which is also a discussion item. This was put on kind of a respite. We put it on recess for a couple of months. This pertains to 2 applications that came to us 2 months ago seeking authorization to prepare students to be licensed in North Carolina. One of the schools was Moreland University, the other KEP. What we've done since then, a small subcommittee made up of myself, Ms. Moore, and Dr. Tipton-Rogers, led by Rupin. We've met several times, and what we're doing is paying attention and beginning to kind of develop a framework for wrapping our heads around what those schools are about, what is their mission, what are they, what are stories of effectiveness. We're nowhere near the completion of that. It's not going to go on for 20 years either. It's going to come to conclusion probably within the next few months. But it's the kind of study that we really need to do because these are the non-traditional University Without Walls. They're non-brick and mortar, but they are making a difference. They are contributing to our pipeline of teachers. So our small subcommittee will continue, considering looking at those institutions. We're going to put a pause on bringing any more of those applications from these non-traditional models. We're putting a short, not forever, but a short pause on them until our committee comes back with more of a full report to share with the State Board of Education. But I don't want the word to get out all over the universe that the state of North Carolina no longer approves these schools. We are just putting it on pause for a bit of time. I believe Dr. Seiberg is going to come give us a quick snapshot of Moreland and KIPP.
Thank you. Good afternoon, Board. First, I'm going to bring Moreland first and KIPP second. Essentially, we're bringing 2 programs to you, as Dr. Oxendine mentioned earlier, and they're coming to you from 2 different routes of initial authorization. Moreland University is coming to you as a program that already has established itself with national accreditation or CAPE accreditation. In the law, there's these 2 routes that an ed prep program can seek initial authorization in North Carolina. One is that you have CAPE accreditation. So if you have national accreditation, you're in the spirit of the law, you're good to go. So what we've provided for Moreland University documentation for you all is their national accreditation documentation. They also had a PowerPoint that they developed that walks through a variety of the information associated with their program. And it's just a nice quick way of sort of getting your head around what they offer and how they offer it. It is an online program. They are in a couple of different states. We've also included a copy of the course catalog. So given that finding of their national accreditation, the department is asking the board to consider them for initial authorization going forward. Then the second one is KIP, and this is coming to you from a different route. The second route that an entity can seek initial authorization from this board is to seek the process through the state board approved process for initial authorization. So if you don't have national accreditation or you're just starting a program, you don't have any data getting started, so you don't have a place to put your foot in the ground and say that, you know, here's evidence of what we're doing, this is the route that you would need to go. And that process, just a quick refresher on the initial authorization process. The applicant needs to present materials about their program proposal that meet North Carolina standards, as well as the CAPE national standards. And that's provided in the materials that you have. And then what we do is we then are required at the department to take that information and run it through what they call a peer review process. And for the peer review process, we actually use CAPE nationally accredited reviewers. So the idea there is, if CAPE is you know, bringing such a high bar of national expectations, and we already have a partnership with them, it's no additional cost to the applicant to do this process. We can leverage these experts that are really well trained at assessing the quality of a program to give us that peer review feedback. And there's no potential conflict of interest that a peer within the state might be, you know, thinking positively or negatively to stack the deck in some way. There's no potential conflict of interest there. So it goes through a peer review process, and then when that proposal has either met all the conditions that the CAPE reviewers look at, and they're found to be either ready or developing on all those standards, then we bring it to you all for consideration. So at this point, KIP has been peer reviewed. They've submitted their information, which you have all those materials at your disposal. And it has been peer reviewed and found to be ready or developing on all the standards. And based on those criteria, the department is asking that you consider them for initial authorization as well.
Okay, very good. Do we have any questions? Any comments? Yes, Mr. Blackburn.
Dr. Oxendine, I recall that when we talked about them before, you had some thoughts about this particular program. So is it fair for me to ask?
Absolutely. I have no problem giving a quick thumbnail of my concerns because they still exist. I do appreciate KEP. They did provide some explanation 2 months ago. We each had a copy by our chairs, and they did offer some explanation around the language, which is absolutely without, I have no reason to say that the language that was used in some of their principles or beliefs about the preparation of their candidates for licensure pulled directly from the dictionary and vocabulary of critical race theory. And I appreciate their explanation. I am certainly not here to argue their explanation, but I am here to say that I am still uncomfortable with it. I think that there are just a host of ways that educators can prepare future educators to be sensitive to differences, to understand and teach the value of empathy and understanding the differences in individuals. I am a 54-year veteran educator, and I am a minority American Indian. I know how to approach these topics, regardless of the color. And I believe that any of our preparation programs can do the very same thing without delving into the vitriol of what I think is CRT and that's my opinion. So, any other comments or questions?
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. So both of those are coming tomorrow for our vote. And then we will move on to ESMP 3. This is I'm sorry, no, we're moving on someplace else. We're moving on to ESMP 4, and this is going to be a presentation from the CTE group, and it pertains to some revisions, updates and revisions in the policy manual, CT Education 004, licensing and testing requirements, also LICN 003. Thank you.
Good afternoon, and thank you. And I'm Robert Filter. I'm the Section Chief for Career and Technical Education. And we have updates for LICN 004 first, I believe. Next slide, please. So the first updates have to do with the eligibility criteria for specific licenses. And the first license is the 721 non-RN license. And we're looking to add a diploma level to that area. And as such, it allows for licensed practical nurses and advanced emergency technicians to use that diploma as an option for qualifying for teacher licensure for that area. And then as well as that, adding medical assisting and kinesiology as specific related degrees mentioned, just because they come up often, and so making sure that it's in the manual for those to read, and then replacing, from a terminology perspective, replacing the emergency medical care with emergency medical science, which is a more used term. And then in association with those, add to the related work experience, the licensed practical nurse, the advanced emergency medical technician, the medical assistant, and then an exercise physiologist. And then pertaining to the diploma level, changing the number of years required and specifically stating 2 years for bachelor or associates, and then adding the 4 years if they were entering through the diploma program. And the last item on that is to, again, a terminology update from paramedic state license to paramedic state credential, which is more appropriate terminology. And then the next slide, updating the eligibility criteria for specific licenses for public safety, adding military experience because it relates, and we had program area consultant request that being added because of the experience in the military that is appropriate for that license. And then from a terminology perspective, the Office of the State Fire Marshal recognizes firefighter instructor, and you'll see the firefighter there as one word as opposed to two, and you'll see another update later pertaining to that. And then for the 830 Curriculum and Instruction Management Coordinator, removing the within past 8-year requirement for the 5 years of experience. We've recently updated the within the past years for teacher licenses and would like to relate it to the CIMC as well. So there's just a 5-year requirement, but not necessarily within that 5-year term. And then next. And then updates to specific licenses for trade and industrial and construction, terminology change to add the words for craft professionals. Again, it ties back to the NCCER instructor training program, and so they reference for craft professionals, so we just want to add that. And then update for career development coordinator. There are currently 3 options for that, and we're looking to combine options 1 and 2. Option 1 was, or the first item for options 1 and 2 were a NCDPI program that has now been split out into both of these that you see there. The National Career Development Association course along with the new CDC induction. And then the other option was an NC Works program along with the new CDC induction. Since both of those were accredited through the National Career Development Association or approved by them, that combining them makes more sense, and then it also allows teachers, because of the number of people that are looking to add that license that we cannot accommodate, it allows them to go externally as long as they use a qualified program. So it puts those options 1 and 2 together, and then the option 2 that you see there's currently option 3 with no change. It just moves it to an option 2. And then on the 749 Career Development Facilitator, again, the same thing. It had the 2 options, and it so combines those 2 into that one 2-course requirement. And then the last slide, or the last 2 slides, have to do with technical edits. On the column heading for degree level, we want to update that to minimum degree level, because currently if it says bachelor's degree, sometimes if somebody has a master, there would be a question as to does that qualify or not. This way it specifically states that anything there or above does qualify for that level. So a minor change, but I think it'll help the field. And then adding the words or GED to the licensure requirements that say high school. Licensure has been applying that concept all along. And so just from a consistency and clear perspective, we want to add that or GED to high school diploma or GED, so it's more specified. The item C there has to do with what I mentioned just a little bit ago pertaining to the firefighter. It is actually a one-word term and not 2, so updating that. The D, again, has to do with clarifying that language for craft professionals, and specifically requires that terminology. So with that, for craft professionals requires 2 years of documented work experience related to the specific crafts that will be taught, or earned NCCER module credentials that align to the standards for the courses that will be taught. So you can have the experience or earn those credentials to add that to your license. And then on the next slide, and the next item is a recent addition following a meeting we've had with licensure. We have a teacher that is looking at or has completed the 18 semester hours or equivalent requirement with a local EPP. And in the manual, it says 18 semester hours. So from a clarification perspective, and the intent all along was for that to be that way, because your local EPPs or your local districts don't give credit in semester hours. They tell how many hours that were completed. And so we want to update this to 18 semester hours or equivalent, and it pertains to the general pedagogy competency requirements that are required for the new teachers for a restricted license. And so, and just as a note, that would be added to the current year and not the future year on that one item. And then the last 2 items are specifically typographical error updates. A TBD has to be updated to 749. And then the Adobe was printed wrong with a P as opposed to a B, so update that. And then ADP really should be ACP. So just updating those specifics and typographical. So those are the items pertaining to adding a license. The next one is a separate topic for testing requirements. So we have a request to change the required score for the praxis on marketing from what's currently 169 to 156. North Carolina currently has the highest qualifying score in the nation for marketing by 13 points. The 156 is the median score for marketing. In all other program areas currently in North Carolina have the median score as a required score. You'll see family consumer science there, technology and business. Their required score are all the median score. Districts have expressed concern about the difficulty in hiring marketing teachers and having them qualify based on the score and the number of times that they have to take the test in order to qualify potentially for a license. And the other consideration is surrounding states have that 156 score or less. We are in the median. Tennessee had the highest score with us. and as recently no longer requires a praxis score. So, and most of the others are certainly at or below or close to or at or below the 156. I have a couple examples that I brought along. Bear with me for just a second. Alabama's 156, Arkansas is 156, West Virginia 153, and Virginia 147. So, thank you very much. Questions?
Thank you. Are there questions? Or are there comments? So with regard to this change in the required score on the praxis, that goes into effect when?
July 1, 2024. So clarification on that, if somebody has already taken the praxis, if they've reached this new qualifying score, we'd like for them to qualify since it is the updated score.
All right, very good. All right, so that is a discussion item. It will return next month for our vote. Thank you very much.
All right, thank you very much.
And then we will go to the next item, number 5, ESMP number 5, and this is going to be presented by Mr. Collins. And it's actually work that has been done as a result of our approving rules changes last month. And so what Mr. Ryan is going to talk about some recommended policy changes pursuant to eval 0014, and that's licensure suspension, and on into LICN 007. And also the other policy affected by this is eval 035.
Thank you, Dr. Oxendine. Good afternoon, everybody, and happy Final Four week. As a double Tar Heel, I'm still not emotionally recovered from last week, but I will take this opportunity to remind you that I do have a master's degree from NC State, so go Pack. All right, I'm here today, as Dr. Oxendine mentioned, to present recommended revisions to the State Board of Education policies regarding the standards of professional conduct and the licensure discipline process. These changes are intended to conform the policies to the new administrative rules that the board adopted last month. Before discussing the policies, I do want to provide the board with an update on the rulemaking process. Last Thursday, March 27th, the Rules Review Commission considered the rules that the board adopted for approval in accordance with the Administrative Procedure Act. Fortunately, the RRC approved most of the rules without issue, and I expect them to be entered into the North Carolina Administrative Code within the coming days. Unfortunately, the RRC objected to the adopted amendments to Rule 16 NCAC 06C.0602, which is what actually lists the standards of professional conduct, based on the RRC's view that one of the provisions of that rule was impermissibly vague in violation of GS 150B-21.9, which sets forth the RRC's standard of review. Mr. Faria has the corresponding policy that is being proposed up on the board. The RRC's objection was specifically to item number 2, personal conduct. And although I explained both in a lengthy written legal analysis and during an in-person appearance before the RRC both the 25-year history of this standard and why I believed its adoption was legally permissible, the RRC nevertheless objected to this provision. Accordingly, while the other rules were adopted by the board, were approved by RRC, these amendments were not. And now, to be clear, because these were proposed amendments to an existing rule rather than a new rule, the current form of that of 602 remains in effect as it has been for the last 25 years. I'm going to be working with the licensure staff as well as Pepsi to bring forward recommended changes to the board next month that I hope will be able to address the RRC's objections and allow the rule to pass at a future date. I anticipate bringing these recommended changes forward for action by the board in May at the same time that these policies that I'm about to discuss will be brought forward for action. Does the board have any questions about the rulemaking process before I discuss the policies? And I apologize, Dr. Oxendine, I know this was not shared previously. It happened, it was a subsequent development, so I apologize for that.
So this is new information.
Correct. But I wanted to flag it for the board's attention now so that you all would not be surprised next month.
Are there any questions? Mr. Duncan?
Is there any other rule-making authority to go by with respect to better defining personal conduct? that's the issue.
So it's not a question of authority, it's a question of clarity. One of the requirements that
And
the
that's what I
RC looks
meant
at.
by
Right.
definition. Is there, in something else, is there sufficient clarity or has been found to be sufficient clarity?
So that is what we're currently working on, and we don't have anything in writing for you all yet. That's what we're planning to bring forward next month, once we've had a chance to discuss with Pepsi and get that recommendation. I just wanted to alert that you all to that fact now, so that you could anticipate that for next month.
So, Mr. Collins, is what you are showing on, is that in our material or not?
So this is one of the new policies, and the language that is in there is identical to what's in the rule. So I just asked Mr. Fafari to pull this up so that you all see the language. So item number 2, personal conduct, that's the provision that's also in the rules that were adopted that the RSC objected to. So whatever solution we recommend changing to the rules will be reflected in the final policy that's up for action, hopefully will be up for action next month.
All right, very good. Questions? Very good,
So,
thank you.
and just to continue with the policy specifically, again, these are the proposed revisions which are just on for discussions this month, the revisions to LICN 007, which covers license suspension and revocation, to align that policy with the new rules. The proposed revisions to eval 014 include some technical changes to the Code of Ethics for North Carolina educators and removes the standards of professional conduct, the currently existing rule that appears at the bottom of that policy, and separates it out into a separate policy, which is eval 035. Just that's more of an organizational change to carve that out into its own policy. So as I mentioned, when these come back for action next month, we'll have recommended fixes to that provision that will hopefully allow it to pass RSC review.
There are no questions. Thank you.
Thank you.
And then we will go to the next item under discussion. This is going to be a report, well, this is the annual report that comes our way on the state of the teaching profession. This is ES&P 6, and it's going to be presented by Dr. Tom.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
I am Tom Toberlin, the Senior Director of Educator Preparation, Licensure, and Performance, and I am presenting to you today on the annual State of the Teaching Profession report. Are the skies darkening outside?
How do you know it? What does that mean? I hope that has nothing to do with your report.
Correlation does not equate to causation. So I think most of you are familiar with the report. I bring this report every year. And I just want to kind of preface this month's presentation with an indication that this will be a little different than what you have normally seen in this regard. So there have been some changes in the attrition and the vacancy rates for North Carolina. And so I want to take the opportunity to try to use this presentation time to not just review the report, but to kind of contextualize what we're seeing and help us understand what it may or may not mean for North Carolina Public Schools. So I'm also doing something a little new here. Because this is so dense with data, there are some call-outs to help direct your attention to certain things in the slide, because my arms don't quite reach. Mr. Fafario is going to assist with that animation. So if we get a little off, give us a little grace. This is the first time we've tried this. So when we talk about North Carolina attrition and vacancy data, I think one of the things that we need to do is contextualize this in the national data around this issue. So one of the best reports that I've seen in a while on this is from some researchers at Kansas State who scraped websites and looked around and tried to come up with what looks like the national attrition data for over the past few years. And so their report runs from 2015-16 all the way through the current school year. I want to point out in this in this chart is you'll see these little pink lines here. So the turnover rate, this is where they estimated the turnover rate based on prior data. And so that's why you see those little pink, those are pink confidence intervals. So they feel like this is what we're estimating, but the actual could be anywhere within that confidence interval. We would expect it to be somewhere in that range. And you can see it's very small for 21-22 because they were using a lot of data and predicting the next year, but then when they go 2 to 3 years out from that, those confidence bands get a little larger. And so that's what those represent there for you. Now, to help us understand how North Carolina compares to this, we've overlaid our historical attrition data on this chart. So you can see that filling in there. And over the years from 2015-16 to the 22-23 school year, we have, the 21-22 school year, I'm sorry, we have maintained an attrition rate that was well below the national average. And so as we think about this, we need to understand that North Carolina has not experienced the increases in attrition that you see particularly in the 2021 and 2022 school years, that we've maintained some stability where it seems other schools across the nation were experiencing increases in their teacher attrition. So we're going to come back to this chart in just a minute, but first I do want to show you the data from this year. And so we've got this laid out for you across years from 2017 all the way down to the bottom, 22-23. And I do need to report that for the 22-23 school year, the teacher attrition rate increased to 11.5%. And so that is an increase from what we saw last year at 7.8%. So, and those numbers are represented in those two far left-hand columns. So when we saw this, we started thinking about, well, how do we understand this? Like, is this the darkening of the skies and the thunderclaps, or is this, can we think about this in context? And one of the ways to really think about the attrition rate in context is to think about how well our LEAs do in hiring new teachers to replace those we lost in the prior year. And so we went into the data and we went back to 2017-18 and we said, how many new hires do we get in every school year to replace those that are attriting? And that's represented in that fourth column, that middle column there. That's the number of new hires that our LEAs produced in the September following that report that we for the year that we measured the attrition. And the next column over shows that rate. So at what rate are we replacing those that we lost? And you can see historically over every year, we have replaced more than 100% of those teachers that left in the prior year. And we've got the average down there. Now, in 22-23, you see that's a little closer than what we're accustomed to. But we still hired in September 2024 more teachers than left in March of 2023. And then the final column there shows the vacancy rate. And you can see the vacancy rate for North Carolina this year, we're reporting in at 6.4%. You'll notice that 21-22 and 22-23, I have a little asterisk by it. And that's because we're going to talk about that vacancy rate a little later in this presentation. But remember, those two numbers have an asterisk beside them. So the next chart just shows you visually what I showed you in that table. So we plotted the attrition rate across time. That's the red line on the graph. And then that replenishment rate, how many teachers that we employed in the following September. So again, the red line shows you that's March of 1 year. And the green is indicating new hires in September of the fall. So yeah, that red line, that call out shows you that that's March of the current year or the prior year, and then the green will indicate the new hires in the following September. So I just want to point out here that historically the gap between the red and the green line has been very substantial. You'll notice in 1920, which we refer to as the COVID year, you saw that pinch. And that's largely due to things being very different. And But we recovered well after that time. Our attrition remained stable during that time, but our replenishment, and that's the term I'm using for this hiring in the following September, continued to rise back up to greater than prior levels than we saw before COVID. And in this final year, you can see that we did lose 10,373 teachers at the end of the 22-23 school year. But in September of 2024, our LEAs hired 11,023 teachers. So if these charts were reversed, if the red line were on top and the green line were on bottom, this would be a serious, serious issue. I'm not suggesting that 11.5% is not serious, but this green line is a mitigating factor in understanding that number. So let's go back to that chart with the predictions of the national trend. And if we fill in the 22-23 school year, you can see we're still a little under of what that prediction was, but we are within the confidence interval of that national data. It appears, I can't make any, affirmative statements about this, but it does appear that we're experiencing a delayed increase. We saw the nation increase in its attrition right after COVID. We did not experience that increase, and we may be experiencing some delayed effect of that because we are kind of following that national trend just a year or two later than what we saw for the rest of the nation. I would like to pause if there's any questions, or I can continue on. I have little section breaks in here for you to ask questions.
Are there any
Ms. Moore.
questions?
Oh, I'm sorry.
Yes, Ms. Moore.
When you look at the number of new hires, would it be helpful to understand overall student enrollment growth or decline in the state as well? Because if enrollment is increasing across the state, you would expect to be hiring more teachers.
Well, I mean, even if when you're saying enrollment, student enrollment in our public schools, yes, you would, but I don't think, and I would turn to, well, I won't turn to her because I don't want to put anybody on the spot, but I'm not sure about whether enrollment numbers are declining or increasing in the state. I'm going to quit.
I just think it'd be
yes.
helpful to see.
Yes, absolutely.
Because there's more context to the numbers that I think is important, in particular enrollment in the state.
Yeah. A similar question also, Tom. Remember you asked for it. You said,
yes.
Do you have any questions?
Absolutely.
But we want to still move along, but since you asked, it's kind of in a way related. What does replacement really mean, though? Does that mean that there were, in a school district, 25, let's say 10 third-grade teachers, 13 eighth-grade teachers, so on and so forth? Does replacement mean those actual positions were replaced, or replacement in general?
So,
replacement means replace that position.
I can't say that it's replacing that position that was vacated, because when districts hire, so let's say you find a teacher and you hire a teacher, and the teacher you hire is a social studies teacher, but you needed an English teacher. Maybe you moved your English teacher into social studies and put the new social studies hire into the social studies position. So I can't say, I purposely avoid the term replacement, and I'm using replenishment. I know this much was taken out of our teaching force, and I know this much was put back in. I can't say that there's a direct correlation between the attriting teacher and the entering teacher, that they replaced each other. But I can say that there has been an increase in capacity to staff our public schools every year that we have done this report.
Right. And another question that rolls around in my head is this. Are we, to use your term, to replenish, are we replenishing with a licensed teacher, or are we replenishing with a full-time sub?
I have a graph for that. So we will be right back to that question. Thank you for asking that. I call that a slow pitch down the middle.
Oh, you may proceed, I can't wait.
Dr. Octonine, can I ask one?
Sure, I'm sorry.
So, Dr. Tomlin, can you connect this data that you just showed us with the frequent reports we get from districts about starting the school year with fewer teachers than they need, as well as the continued problem of having open positions in our districts? This would imply that we've got plenty of teachers and we shouldn't have any open positions, and that districts shouldn't have any trouble hiring teachers, but how do you relate the two?
So there is a difference between what school systems employ in a given year and what they would prefer to employ had they had full access. So imagine a world where hiring a teacher is not an issue. They're just lined up out the door. I believe that many of our schools would hire more than what they actually employ in a given year, that they make do with what they have, and they find other ways to compensate for that. I'm not suggesting at all that districts aren't still actively looking for positions, but we're measuring what was employed in that past year, and of those that were employed, how many of them left. And so I'm not trying to suggest that our schools are operating at 100% capacity at all times. All I'm saying is, given the rate of employment that we saw, which is arguably below what we would all want, we're measuring how many of those left those positions. I think the other thing in here, so it does raise some questions about how, if only 9,000 left and we're not expanding our schools, how did we hire 11,000? And so one of the things that helps make that understandable is when a teacher leaves a teaching position and moves into a instructional support or a leadership or an administrative role, we don't count that as attrition from the state. But that position has to be filled by somebody. So this gap that you're seeing is likely due to LEAs backfilling teaching positions where there's been a promotion to an instructional support role, a coach, an academic technology person, some other type of role that we're not measuring as a classroom role, and it's not appearing in our attrition data, but it represents a need for filling those positions. So it's pretty complicated, and I'm not saying also that this surplus is equally distributed among all of our LEAs across the state. Some of our LEAs are much better at attracting additional staff than others. And so that keeps those vacancies in those really hard to staff districts high, whereas some of our other districts may not be experiencing that as keenly.
To summarize, it sounds like you're encouraging us to not be quick to make conclusions from this data. It's much more complex than the simple numbers you put on the screen.
Oh, it's extremely complex, yes. I mean,
We
and
have a long way
it's,
to go.
yeah. Yeah.
Yes.
Yes, Superintendent.
So I want to continue what Dr. Tom Rowland just said and remind the board that vacancy numbers at the beginning of the school year are always high, and that there is so much local contextual factors to whether or not a district is fully staffed. And we had some districts last year that still had vacancies in October, and some districts that didn't, that were fully, were at capacity, staff-wise. So it's hard to look at. We don't want to lose things in the averages.
Yes.
Right.
One more quick question.
Yep.
One more quick question.
Sure.
If a district, and this happens more frequently than we would like, but maybe not as frequently as we might think, if both of those can be true. If a school never fills a vacancy, does the attrition only show in the year that it became vacant?
So if a position is, so let's say you start out the school year with a vacant position and it never fills during the course, it doesn't count as attrition because nobody left that position.
Okay.
So that goes back to the issue of we're not showing attrition on what a fully staffed state would look like and how many positions are vacant are vacant at the end of the year. We're looking at people who were employed in that year, who were employed in March of one year and were no longer employed in March of the following year.
So it would show up in the vacancy rate perhaps?
That's right.
Thank you.
One thing about the vacancies, to that point that was made earlier, vacancy is an ongoing issue. And we try to highlight this in the report by measuring on the first day of school and the 40th day of school. The statute only requires us to report on the 40th day, but we include that first day to show that there is attrition on the first day, and in many cases, it decreased dramatically by the 40th day. But we've also shown in other years that even when the vacancy rate stays the same from the first to the 40th days, those are not the same positions. So it's a different vacancy on the 40th day than it was on the first day. So the idea that vacancy is something that happens at the beginning of the year and is an issue that the LEAs struggle with just in the first few months of the school year is absolutely erroneous. They struggle with this issue continuously throughout the school year.
Very good. We have about 40 minutes.
Okay. So contextualizing the attrition and vacancy data. So one thing that's helpful here is to look at how does education compare to other sectors. This graph, this is vacancy for the public sector. And if you can see there is a light pink line that shows all public sector industry excluding farming seasonal, so it's not included in this. Pretty high vacancy rates across those. This is national data. And then we kind of drill down to that teal one in the middle. That's all state and local government excluding public education. And so those vacancy rates are pretty high, but not quite as high as the full public sector. And then finally, when we separate out public education by itself, that is much lower than what we see in public sector industry in terms of the vacancy rate. So public education does very well relative to other public sector positions in terms of filling their vacancies year after year. So if we think about attrition in that same vein, this is North Carolina data. We look at across the last couple of years, December 20 through December 2022, you can see, and again, December 2020, that's the COVID year, and then 21, those are the post-COVID years. Attrition rates in state government running about 17% in those years as compared with what we've seen historically, 7 to 8, and then now 11.5. And then some of the turnover rates for specific areas of our state government are listed there. And then finally, on the right-hand side, we looked at DHHS and their ability to attract and retain their nursing and medical staff. And you can see extremely high turnover rates there in the 30s and vacancy rates of almost half. So again, not trying to minimize what we're seeing here, but just providing the context of what we're seeing in other public sector industries in terms of their attrition and vacancy. And I can pause there or move ahead.
You can just,
Sorry.
I have a question, yes.
So
Okay.
perhaps the other conclusion from the chart is that the public sector is doing so poorly, that we're doing so little investing in the public sector in terms of employment, and public education is also doing poorly but lagging behind. I mean, these kind of vacancy rates, how do you run DHHS or any of these other state agencies? So,
Well, what
Superintendent.
those agencies and the teaching workforce and this agency have in common is that you have very rigid pay structures that are dependent upon very specific types of resumes, where people get paid for doing the same job, whether they do it well or not. And this is not what appeals to the millennial generation or the Gen Z, where people do not want to stay in a job for 30 years to realize the benefit, the economic benefit of that job. And so what we're going to continue to see throughout this presentation is more evidence of why people choose not to stay in a job that is, quite frankly, much more difficult than working in an agency where you have some flexibility and don't have the same constraints that one does in a public school setting, which I would argue is a much more difficult job than working at DHHS, or forgive me, DHHS employees, or for working in the Department of Public Instruction. Teaching is one of the most difficult jobs there is.
Very good, okay. Other questions? Thank you. You can move along.
All right, so let's look at attrition and teacher experience. So teachers don't experience attrition uniformly across the spectrum of years of experience. I've shown you this graph every year. Call it the U-shaped graph. It doesn't look any different than what we've seen in the past, with some exception on the zero. I want to point, well, let's look first at the right-hand side of the graph. So you can see that high attrition on the right-hand side, starting around year 29 of service. Attrition for the teachers in this area is likely impervious to any kind of state board policy intervention. You're fighting against the retirement system and the well-earned benefits of the retirement system. This is a financial decision on the part of the employee. They're tired, and they're ready to retire. Compare that, though, with these folks on the left. These levels are exactly the same for attrition levels for a teacher in their first year and their teacher in the 35th year of teaching. 26% of teachers in their first year left. This group is likely to be responsive to state board policy initiatives. They are leaving for a reason. They came in thinking they wanted to be a teacher, and after a year, they decided this is not what I want to do. 1 in 4 of them did. And so decisions on these folks to leave the profession may include things like lack of mentor support, lack of a manageable workload, and other things that the State Board of Education does have policy control over. I don't know what those are. I want to be very clear. I don't know exactly what they are, but it's interesting to me that somebody wants to go into teaching, and after 1 year, it's no longer a desirable profession for them.
Ms. Warren?
I would just want to point out that as you ponder the possible reasons that people after a year or so are leaving in higher numbers, it is problematic to me that you would not include, since we're wondering, the pay even at the beginning.
Well, I try to include policy relevant. I mean, you folks don't have control
You
over.
mentioned pay at the end,
Yes.
right? Okay.
All right. But granted, yes, I think pay likely has something to do with it.
Supplement that point, there used to be a mentor supplementation, because that's also one of the reasons you have up there, and that no longer, this board doesn't control that.
That's right.
From a policy standpoint, I think that policy comes from other locations.
Well, yes.
I'm
No worries.
stretching out here, I see. By all means.
I have a quick question, Tom.
Sure.
Do we have data on who those beginning teachers are? We've been having a small conversation around, are these teachers who have gone through a traditional educator prep program, or are these people who have come in via other methods who did not have pedagogical or educational training, and then we get them a year in without those supports, and they go, this is not what I thought it was? Do we have the breakdown of like how many of those are trained teachers and how many of those people who thought, oh, I can do that, and realized it's a lot harder than they thought?
That's a great question, and that goes to my next slide. So, so we looked at, so we wanted to understand, how are these teachers coming in to the profession? What route are they taking? So we looked at the traditional route, and for those I'm not a fan of these terms, but they're the parlance of the day. Traditional route means that your preparation program was embedded in your undergraduate experience and that you did student teaching, and then you entered the profession kind of eyes wide open, and you knew what you were getting into. So historically, this has represented about a third of our incoming cohort of teachers every year. You can see that since 2017, this has decreased by 24% to this year. In 2020, 22-23, it was about 1 in 4 teachers were coming through that pathway. Then also another significant contributor is the out-of-state teaching force. Let me get my highlights to catch up. There's the traditional. The out-of-state teaching force, and these are generally experienced teachers that are coming to us from other states. That used to be about a quarter of the population. It's down now to 1 in 5 of our pipeline. Then we look at the alternative, the residency route, and this is what Ms. Jones was talking about here. Teachers that are coming in thinking, yeah, I got this, and then they've got no advanced kind of preparation for the experience, and they, for whatever reason, they may be abandoning it earlier. And that's now making up 44% of our incoming pipeline across the state. Of note is the international. Traditionally, this has been a very small number of our incoming pipeline, but I do think it's worth pointing out that this contribution to the pipeline has increased 148% since the 2017-18 school year. So it's up to 10% of the pipeline now. And that has its own challenges. These are folks coming to, this is a cultural exchange program. They're coming to experience the culture of the United States as a teacher, and that can have its own implications for how well they do and the struggles they might experience. So I didn't only look at the route, but also the license type, and this goes more toward Ms. Jones's question here. And so how are teachers coming in according to their license type? This is for newly hired educators. So I have an asterisk there, and that asterisk is a newly hired teacher is defined as an educator who has not been employed as a licensed educator in the prior 3 school years. So if anybody's coming in that was employed in the prior year or skipped 1 year, we didn't include them. They have been away for at least 3 years, and they've come back, and we're considering them newly employed. So what is the licensure status of those people? Surprising to me was that 1 in 5 of those, historically, 1 in 5 of those people that come back held a CPL. These are experienced teachers who took a hiatus from teaching and are now returning to the profession. Historically, it was 1 in 5, but now in the 22-23 school year, we see that it has dropped from that to about 12.5% for the prior year. Also, our IPLs, our traditionally prepared teachers, you can see that it was around 44-45%. It has dropped now down to a third. And then finally, this alternative pathway, we have to understand that this is not a singular license type. The alternative pathway is actually 3 licenses that articulate to form the alternative pathway. And from left to right, they're permit to teach, emergency, and residency. And teachers can enter anywhere on one of those 3 licenses, and they progress from left to right. So you could start with a permit, you move to an emergency, and then you move to a residency. When you look at it this way, we find that 42% of that incoming cohort in 2023 came through that pathway. So most of you know that that the permit to teach and the emergency license, when we brought these to the board, they are to provide a scaffolding for people who are not prior educators to find a way into the residency license. And so you leverage these licenses to build a stair step to get to the to the residency license. So it really is important to understand how well we're using those temporary licenses to progress to the residency route. And so on the next slide, and I want you all not to be too frightened of this slide, but what it's doing is looking at what happens to folks between the 18-19 school year and the 2021 school year who were issued a permit to teach. So in that time, a total of 2,547 teachers were issued a permit to teach. The graph continues on to show us what happened to those folks in subsequent years. And if you'll notice, 55% of those who held a permit to teach went on to convert that permit to teach to a residency license. That's great. That's extraordinary. However, if you look at the bottom, more than a third of them did abandon the license. There was no subsequent movement from permit to teach to another type of license. So they're no longer employed. That's 36%. That's over 1,000 teachers in that time period who held the license for a single year and then were gone. We also, on the next slide, we look at the emergency license teachers. So again, 1,427 of them, they should be moving next to the emergency license. A little more than a third of them did do that. They moved to the residency license in the subsequent year. However, more than half of them abandoned that license and did not follow through to the residency license. There is a serious leak in the alternative pipeline, and one that must be addressed if we are to contain the attrition rates that we're seeing in this year. So the other thing that I need to point out is I want to go back to the beginning versus experienced teacher attrition rate. So beginning teachers in this year, 15.1% attrition rate for what we consider beginning teachers. I want to clarify how we define a beginning teacher. The LEAs report to us, this is a beginning teacher enrolled in our beginning teacher support program. That's how we do the identification. And so we saw a 15.1% attrition rate for these folks. Compare that with last year when it was 13.1. For experienced teachers, we do see that there was a substantial increase in their attrition rate over the 6.9 we saw before, but still, attrition rate for beginning teachers is half again as much as what it is for experienced teachers. So we wanted to dig into this a little bit because we were concerned that we're not seeing the full picture when it comes to beginning teachers. And so I want to go back to this identification. LEAs report to us what the beginning teacher population is. And so in 22-23, that was 10,103. So DPI went into the licensure data and we said, we want to know everybody that was issued a license in the 2021 school year. That was the first time they were ever issued a license. And how many of those are employed in our North Carolina public schools? And when we did that analysis, we came up with 13,534. And you could see in the prior year, we did the same analysis where the districts were reporting 13,169, we're finding 15,621. These data suggest that BTs are being underreported and or underserved by 34% in this past school year and 18.6% in the prior school year. If these teachers are not being supported, it is highly unlikely that they will continue in the profession. To corroborate this, we look back at the teacher working conditions survey data for 21-22. We don't have it for this year, but we look back that year. When we looked at that, there were 14,000 teachers that identified themselves as BT, still a higher number than reported by the LEAs. And of those, 6% said they were not assigned a mentor. And about 18% of them said they received no additional support as being a beginning teacher in that school year. So this information, again, is to help us understand what we can do to try to stem this attrition rate increase that we've seen for this year. So last, I want to talk about vacancies. So remember we starred those numbers. And so when we talk about vacancies, there's a couple ways to think about this. And I've defined them in two ways. One is open positions, and the other one is permanent positions. So if we look at open positions, that's the way we reported these vacancy data up through the 2021 school year. It focuses on the number of positions without a licensed adult in the role. Once that position is filled, it no longer counted as a vacancy. And it was blind to the replacement, whether that replacement was fully licensed or not. Now contrast that with this idea of understanding the vacancy of permanent placements in the state. And so when you think about it that way, that's the way we define the vacancy as of the 21-22 school year according to the statute. In that case, it focuses on having a fully qualified educator in a permanent position. That's what we want to know. That's what the legislature is asking for in the vacancy report. If the position is filled by an educator with a certain type of license, then the vacancy persists. So if an educator holds an emergency license or a permit to teach, it still counts as a vacancy, even though there is a licensed educator in that position, it still counts as a vacancy. Rehired retirees, regardless of their licensure status, do not count as filling a vacant position because they cannot, by definition, permanently occupy that position. So this is very important in understanding the perceived increase in vacancy rates across the state. And so if we look at this, so just to kind of recap, that statutory change in measuring vacancies means we can't compare 21-22, 22-23 to prior years of vacancy data. They are measured completely differently. Teachers who hold an emergency or permit to teach are still counted as vacancies. Rehired retirees and provisionally licensed teachers count as vacancies. And long-term sub and other unlicensed employees count as vacancies. Now, the federal regs allow us to count permit to teach and emergency license, temporary licensed teachers as qualified teachers. But this is not a federal issue, this is a state issue. The state statute has provided us with this definition of vacancies. So with that in mind, let's go back and look at that vacancy rate. So this year we reported 6,008 vacancies across the state on the 40th instructional day. Emergency licenses. In order to hold emergency license, you have to be employed by a North Carolina public school. And so we can subtract that 1,685 from that vacancy, and that gives us 4,300. And then again, if you hold a permit to teach, we know in the 22-23 school year there were 844 permits to teach. That brings the vacancy down to 3,479, and that would give us a 3.7 rate that is comparable to what we've seen before in the past. That's the rate that we can say, is this movement relative to what we've seen historically? And so I think it's very important for folks to understand that we are counting these things differently than we have in the past. The LEAs don't like it. It really feels really bad to them to find somebody, hire them, and license them, and then have to turn around and say that's a vacancy. And certainly it kind of runs counterintuitive to what you would think of as a vacancy, to have somebody licensed in the position but still say the position's vacant. But this is important in understanding the context of that. So that is a lot. And so just quickly, I'd like to summarize the main findings. The North Carolina teacher attrition rate has increased this year to 11.5%. Public school units have, however, been able to hire new teachers at a rate that exceeds those attrition rates. That's true in the past year and historically. Other public sectors, including state government, have shown increases in attrition as well. Teacher attrition is not uniform across years of experience. Early and late career teachers experience attrition rates differently than their mid-career counterparts. And how teachers enter the profession in terms of license and pathways has shifted over the years from the traditional route to the alternative route. The alternative pathway shows serious leaks on the route to residency licensure. Vacancy rates in North Carolina public schools show an increase over the prior year. Changes in statute that define state vacancies as of 2021 make direct comparisons to prior years meaningless. And accounting for the statutory changes allows us to estimate the percentage of classrooms without a licensed educator. And then finally, policy implications. The data presented in this report suggests that early career teachers are not being supported enough or in the most helpful ways. Policy related to beginning teacher support were developed at a time when the traditional route to licensure was the dominant pathway to teaching. NCDPI recommends a review of the board's beginning teacher support policy and program to find ways to better support teachers who are entering the profession from other professions and/or without formal pedagogical training. I'm happy to take any questions.
And the trustee question mark. Ms.
Just a couple on the specifically the beginning versus experienced teacher attrition slide. The discrepancy between LEA reported beginning teachers and then the attrition rate and no, not that, where's the other? No, the other one, the identifying beginning teachers.
Yeah.
That one. So, are beginning teachers first, second, third year, which one? All three?
All three. They should be all three.
Okay. Does policy require that VT3s have a mentor?
I'm not sure,
Yes.
but I think it does, yes. I
Okay.
think they have to have a mentor through the whole program.
Okay. And then, was there any work done at DPI to identify who was sitting in that discrepancy and work with LEAs to understand how that happens?
We haven't been able to dig into that yet, no, but that would be part of this process. So one of the things I think might be going on is these temporary licenses may not be, some districts may not interpret them as qualifying for the beginning teacher support. So they may be waiting until the residency license to begin that. And that goes back, and my assumption on that is when I was a lateral entry teacher, I did my 3 years of coursework and then I entered the ILT, the Initially Licensed Teacher Support Program. So I did 3 years of coursework and then I was an ILT for 3 years. And I'm wondering if that's some of the, I don't know this to be true, but it may be that some of our districts don't interpret those temporary licenses as qualifying for the beginning teacher support program.
And that could be helped along by revising the language and policy at this level. Because it is no longer, that definition of when you begin your ILT back then was also tied to when a mentor could be paid. When
Right.
there were funds to pay mentors.
That's right.
And now that there are no longer funds to pay mentors unless a district does it out of their local pot, those requirements around when you get a mentor don't really exist.
Superintendent.
The question of why and when teachers leave is not a new one to anyone on this board. And it is something that the department, and in particular Mrs. Kamnitz, and I have been working on for a couple of years now with Pathways to Excellence, which is the reimagining of teacher licensure and compensation. I think it's important to point out a couple of things. Teachers do not leave simply because of money. They say to themselves, and this is borne out in working condition surveys and other anecdotal evidence, I wasn't supported, and therefore the work that I did was not worth the compensation I received. Teachers don't say, I mean, maybe sometimes they do, but by and large, it's not, I love my job, but I am not making enough money, so I'm going to leave. And our coding for why teachers leave and switch of the profession kind of leans into that a little bit. Mentorship on its own is not the answer. There is no way we can control for fidelity of implementing any type of mentorship program. Mentorship looks different from not just building to building, but classroom to classroom and certainly district to district. The answer is that we have to stop expecting a first-year teacher to do the same job as a year 15 or a year 20 teacher. law clerks do not begin their profession, or sorry, new attorneys do not begin their profession and do the exact same job as someone who's been at the firm for even 6 years. Same for many other professions. And so what Pathways contemplated and what Advanced Teaching Rules does to some degree, but not nearly enough, is that it allows for new teachers, regardless of whether they are new right out of college or new to the profession at a midpoint in their life, mid-career in their life. So it supports students, to new teachers, not with just by checking in and allowing them to vent and maybe helping them write lesson plans. It's a completely different expectation of the job that they are going to do. And not coincidentally, tomorrow during my board presentation, my superintendent's report to the board, I will be sharing a school district outside of North Carolina that is doing exactly what we envisaged in Pathways, but even more than that, because it encompasses strategic staffing. And it allows for all teachers to be supported by their team, but also in particular our most new teachers to get the kind of support that they need in order to persist in the profession. And I just, this is something that, you know, many of us have been saying for a while, that teacher support needs to be embedded into licensure. And it's not right now. We need to completely overhaul the way we license, compensate, and support teachers.
Yes, I agree. Okay, very good.
Thank you.
Mr. Duncan?
I'll be brief, and thank you for those comments, and I think the work that was done by the Pathways Committee was very valuable, and I do agree that finding ways to support young teachers and giving that work is important work. The fundamental truth is we don't have the base compensation right for our teachers in the state. That's the fundamental truth. And a lot of those other things fall into place if we resolve the fundamental truth of having the proper base compensation in place that will make Pathways work, or whatever initiative similar to Pathways. Will also make mentorship work, and those are things that are extremely important. If you compare what the salaries are to teachers coming out of school compared to salaries of other positions coming out of school, it immediately makes it a difficult profession, a difficult choice for someone to make to go into that as a profession. And then to stay with it the way the salary structure is set up also is not attractive. So the fundamental truth is we want people who love teaching, and there are a lot of people who love teaching up there, and we need to give them a reason to continue to love teaching, because I agree completely. There's no great teacher in the world who does it for the money. They don't do it for the money. They do it because they're good at it and they know they're making a difference in the world, and God bless them for all that they're doing.
Thank you very much. I see two hands to my left.
You can go first, Kim.
I wanted to speak to particularly that compensation part, to say there's another side to that equation, and that's in things that we have done successfully as a state in the past. Some of those things we've heard about at the board. Things like the Grow Your Own programs that our districts are carrying out now, and the growth and expansion of those programs. Programs like the Teaching Fellows Program. Compensation for beginning teachers does not have as great an impact when you do not go into the career with debt. I was very fortunate to be able to choose education because I had a full academic ride at a fellowship for my master's. I went into teaching with no debt. As a state, we used to prioritize education as a career, freeing up a greater diversity of who those teachers could be, where they could come from, how they could represent our full state through a statewide investment in teacher education programs at little to no cost for those students pursuing education. If we can't move the ball on this side, we have to continue to advocate for the expansion of programs that make education a reasonable choice for teachers. When kids come out with little to no debt or reduced debt, when we are able to put in place things like the public service forgiveness loans, and those become viable options, teachers stay in the classroom. To the superintendent's point, part of the calculus is not only is it worth doing this, and this job is really tough, it's is it worth doing this really tough job with no support, and I owe the federal government a third of my check every month. That's when the calculus becomes a lot harder. So I think I've been heartened by much of what I've heard, but I really hope that moving forward our conversations are yes and on programs that we already have in place that I know from my 18 years in the classroom absolutely make a difference. I've been able to hold on through the most taxing challenges because I did not have student debt hanging over my head.
Those conversations need to be echoed in that direction.
Absolutely.
Especially. I know everyone around this table agrees. Something that gave me so much hope in looking at this was how many people want to be teachers. Did you see that? How many people, like, I want to try, let me in. And that is beautiful. What are we doing to keep these people? Guys, people want to come and be part of this. They want to do this work, and we need to support them. And that's just like the overarching theme that I felt was, what are we doing to help them? Let them stay. We want you here. Please come. We want you here.
Thank you very much. Everybody's comments just enrich this entire session, about an hour's worth. And I see one more point that you
Yeah,
want to
I think I implied it, but I want to say it explicitly, and I hope it's come out in this presentation, that the silver lining of this cloud is the extraordinary work that our LEAs do in finding teachers, specifically our HR directors and their recruitment staffs. It is extraordinary what they do to replenish our supplies every year, and I really think our hats should be off to them and the efforts they make every year. I know it's hard.
Thank you, Dr. Tomberlin. One more presentation, and this is going to be, I'm going to look to Julie Pittman to introduce the team, and this is this nice segue to support for beginning teachers. I apologize for being over time. We will move through it.
We're going to be efficient.
Thank you.
Good afternoon. My name is Julie Pittman, and I'm the Special Advisor to State Superintendent Truitt for teacher engagement. And while we've heard all this great data about the teaching workforce, I'm excited to be here this afternoon to highlight how regions, and great that we heard the regional structure this morning, and then this report this afternoon was very serendipitous. We're going to see how regions are using the data from this report as well as several others. And they're using it each year to develop ways that they can address teacher recruitment and retention and supporting teachers in their own regions and the districts that they serve. In my years of doing this work, I have spent my time in every single region of the state and in over 100 districts and many, many charter schools, seeing how our schools, our EPPs, and our regional support teams are doing this work to address the needs of our students, classrooms, and our teachers within that region. Today, we're going to see this work with the collaboration between Regional Director Dr. Beth Metcalf, who you heard from this morning, in the Southeast region, and Summer Lewis from UNCW's Watson College of Education in the Southeast region. And Summer's going to highlight a newly announced honor that Watson recently received for this very work. So I'm going to let her talk about that, but that work that was originally started under the leadership of then Dean Dr. Van Dempsey. Next month, we're going to highlight a similar collaboration with the partnership between another regional director you heard from this morning, Stephanie DeShavi, and the ASU Wright College of Education in the Northwest region. So we're going to hear from Summer first, and then from Dr. Beth Metcalf, and then I'm going to talk to you very briefly about what our Teacher Leadership Council is doing to also address these problems and bring some opportunities for you to ponder as you move forward in this work. Summer? Or Beth, sorry.
I don't pretend to be Summer. She's much more talented than I am. But it brings me great pleasure to share with you the What Works Regional Partnership, particularly right after the conversation that we had. The What Works Regional Partnership is named that for a reason, because we are really focused on the positive of what is working in public education. How do we scale that up, and how do we build upon each other's strengths in order to support each other across different types of education agencies? So What Works is about a 2-year-old partnership at this point, really a post-COVID outcome of perhaps some of the separation and opportunity to re-engage all the educational partners in the region to work on the big rocks. What are the things that we all need to come together on? And then how do we create that open communication amongst all partners, not just DPI and the university, but do that in a way that also gathers feedback from our superintendents, the senior level staff, and our LEAs so that we can solve regional and state issues, specifically in this case, regional issues. So What Works is responsive. That would be the word I would use to describe the partnership. When we spend time together as a group, it never looks the same, but it always looks the same because it's invigorating, it's creative, it's strategic. But what we're tackling sometimes can look very specific to our region. It's a true information exchange and with a focus on scalable and actionable ideas. So some partnership topics to date are on the slide. Of course, the first one is the first one, teacher and educator recruitment retention as part of our ongoing conversation with What Works in the Southeast. Other topics that we continue to work through are science of reading implementation, grow your own recruitment initiatives, teacher licensure pathways, and so many more. This particular group really goes to all corners of what conversations the superintendents, LEAs, university, and DPI need to be working on together. So fast forward through our first year. Last spring, after the report that you just saw was released, this group spent quite a bit of time in that report and reviewed our own regional attrition data, kind of made that report smaller and more discrete to what's actually happening in the regions in the Southeast. After discussing the implication of that data, a task force kind of spun off from What Works, where we wanted to examine the Southeast a little closer and took a little different spin. We focused on the stayers, so not the leavers, but the stayers. So who's staying in the classrooms in the Southeast? Who's staying in the schools in the Southeast? And how do we capitalize on that? How do we capitalize on what works? So in the theme of how we do business in that group, it was very apropos that we were spending time talking about the stayers. So you can see the districts and the groups that were involved on the slides. All of those districts and groups and LEAs are either part of the Southeast region or part of the Professional Development System Partnership at the university. So that crossover happens pretty seamlessly. And then that group launched 2 teams that worked simultaneously last summer. The 2 teams are highlighted on your slide. There was a data review work group, which I was involved in, and then there was a survey development work group. Again, the data review group was working on data in the Southeast, specific to the Southeast, that comes from our Southeast districts and from the HR directors, as Dr. Tomlin said, that collect a lot of the information that we need. And then the survey development group was kind of our next steps group, and Summer Lewis, who's going to talk to you in just a minute, led that group through the university, but really developed and launched a personnel survey for the stayers. In other words, what did we need to know from the people that were staying so we capitalize on it? And the results of that are deep and wide. I won't go through all of them with you. Be glad to work with any of you individually or answer your questions about that. But we were able to look at some of the impactful findings that you see on your screen. What are the reasons people were staying at their current site in the Southeast right now? What were the reasons people were staying in their school districts in the Southeast at that very moment? What were their top incentives to stay? What did they consider their most immediate needs in order to retain certified staff? And probably the most telling part of what we were able to look at in this partnership were what were the top reasons that their reality differed from their experience. And that was a very rich part of the data set that we were able to collect, and has really been a nice opportunity for our team to act on that and to learn from that, because it's a little bit different perhaps than what teachers have been asked before. I want to point out that there was a potential of 5,000 respondents, almost 2,500 responded. So we're not talking about a small number of certified staff in the region. We're talking about a significant number of our certified staff who are staying in the Southeast region that were able to help inform our next steps and help us understand how to help them, as many of you have said, want to continue to teach and stay excited about it. So I'm going to turn it over to Summer Lewis from UNCW. She's going to talk a little bit more about this work and some of our future work that's coming up.
Good afternoon. As Beth said, my name is Summer Lewis. I'm the director of our professional development system, which is our school-university partnership in the Watson College of Education at UNCW. And I really appreciate the opportunity to be here today. I'm going to give you a little bit of context in our work and just talk to you a little bit about our school-university partnership as a whole. We have really had a partnership in place for over 30 years in the Southeast region. And so we situate that work in looking at a professional learning continuum. So for us at UNCW, it really isn't just about our students in the classrooms doing their field and internship experiences. We really look at supporting that whole continuum of professional learning. From the moment that a student decides that they want to be a teacher, from their years as beginning teachers all the way through their years as veteran teachers or school leaders. We have lots of different flexible touch points within our partnership. As Beth and Julie said, we were recognized for this work this year by the National Association of School University Partnerships. This is the second time we've received a national recognition for our partnership work, so we're excited to share this with you today. I'm going to talk to you a little bit about beginning teacher support because that is why I was asked to be here. So within that professional learning continuum, we've really focused on building out an ecosystem of beginning teacher support. And I've got some data here for you, as well as 4 programs that we have initiated in the Southeast region. We are one of the regional partners for the North Carolina New Teacher Support Program. That is a university-based induction program for beginning teachers in their first, second, and third year. Currently, UNCW is supporting 2 school districts in the region, over 80 teachers. We joined that program in 2018. Since then, we've supported over 250 teachers. And the North Carolina New Teacher Support Program is shown to have a statistically significant and positive effect on teacher retention. And so we've really been committed to that support, which includes one-on-one instructional coaching, professional development for teachers, and also a statewide institute, which allows beginning teachers to connect throughout the state. Additionally, the region also hosts beginning teacher learning labs. Those are responsive learning labs that are specifically focused on beginning teacher needs. We've hosted conference days and things like that over the last several years, but we've really tried to listen to the needs of our beginning teachers and the beginning teacher support coaches who are doing the work in the classrooms, inviting them in this year to talk specifically about instruction, about planning, and about assessment. So really getting back to basics in terms of what beginning teachers need to be successful and stay in the classroom. Additionally, as a part of our partnership, we also provide opportunities to advance leadership for beginning teachers and celebrate the work that they're doing. We facilitate a beginning teacher promise of leadership cohort model. That cohort model has been in place since 2011. Since then, we've supported 99 beginning teachers. Those beginning teachers are provided leadership opportunities in their classrooms, in their schools, in their districts. In the 10th year of that program, we established a legacy cohort and did some research around whether or not those teachers were staying in the profession, and we found that of the respondents, over 80% of those teachers had stayed in some capacity in the teaching profession. Those beginning teachers are paired with master teachers, which is a whole other presentation on a different day. But that program specifically looks to elevate master teachers in terms of their own self-efficacy, in terms of leadership. And so providing that opportunity to pair beginning teachers and master teachers and work on some shared leadership opportunities has been increasingly effective in our region. And then last but not least, our newest initiative is our Educators of Color network. This network was established in 2022 really as a result of the executive order that was given by the governor at the time to establish the DRIVE Task Force. UNCW really focused on bringing together educators, all educators, not just educators of color, but specifically focusing on bringing together educators of color to increase diversity in the teaching pipeline. We know that we need teachers in classrooms who look like the students that they're serving. And so our focus for the last couple of years has been bringing folks together to focus on recruitment, retention, and also advocacy efforts within the Educators of Color Network. To date, we have 191 members from across the state in the network. We're also particularly excited about establishing 5 local affinity groups in the Southeast region. Those are groups that have been established within their districts. They have partners that are local in their counties, but we've been able to provide seed funding for those districts to get those initiatives off the ground. They're using that money to do TA to teacher programs, to provide programming around culturally responsive teaching, and also future teacher opportunities. Julie or Beth mentions grow your own models, to support those grow your own models in those specific districts. And then last but not least, I also do want to share with you, in addition to some of those networking opportunities and larger regional programs, our university faculty and Jen Hatch Knight, who is my assistant director, goes out into the schools and also provides on-site collaborative programming, whether it's in districts or at particular school sites. I just gave you 2 examples here. This year we're working very closely with Pender County Schools and their amazing beginning teacher coaches. Jen is out in the schools co-designing sustained collaborative professional learning opportunities for their beginning teachers, working together with those coaches to design and also deliver that professional development. They have 7 hybrid sessions that they've been facilitating over the course of this academic year, with anywhere from 25 to 45 attendees at each of the sessions, and they're already making plans for what that's going to look like in the coming academic year. Additionally, we've also had a very robust national board certification support program at UNCW for quite some time. And in the last several years, we've been working with districts specifically to build out their own national board certification support programs. With Onslow County Schools in particular, we were able to work with them to establish a BT to Boards program. So that is a co-designed model where we're targeting beginning teachers in their second year who are interested in eventually achieving national board certification. And teachers have 3 years to achieve that certification. So the district has implemented a 2-year cohort model to provide support and funding to those teachers who are interested in achieving that certification. And at the university, we've designed a gradual release model that then allows the districts to take on and sustain that support over the course of, we hope forever, but over the course of the next several cohorts. We've had success with that several times, in addition to professional development opportunities that align our North Carolina professional teaching standards with the national board certification standards as well. So those are just a couple of examples of some of the work that we're doing in the Southeast region, where we have found some really great success and have been able to retain teachers. All right, we've got another slide. I'm going to go ahead and talk a little bit then about what's next. So in terms of our future regional work, we do plan to continue this What Works model. So we've had great success meeting with our superintendents, district level leadership, our university faculty and faculty leadership. We do have regularly scheduled times. We actually have a meeting next Tuesday. We regularly schedule times to collaborate, communicate, identify where work needs to happen, task forces that need to be developed. We are going to continue this into the next academic year in order to respond to our regional needs. Additionally, just as an example of another initiative that has been a result of this work that we're getting ready to start, one of the conversations that came about last year, not only in our What Works meetings, but in meetings with our master teachers and meetings with our beginning teacher instructional coaches, is the work that we need to do around building resilience in our educators. Not just our beginning teachers and veteran teachers, but also for us at the university and our future teachers. So through the North Carolina New Teacher Support Program, we were able to present a proposal for a research practice partnership in the region get some funding, around $50,000, to initiate the Watson Wellness Program, which will focus on building out resilience and wellness skills in both our future teachers and beginning teachers. We are currently in the process of piloting that program with our future teachers at UNCW, and in the fall, we'll be partnering with Sampson County Schools to pilot that program. So we hope to be able to come back and share the results of that work. So thank you. I will pass it back to Julie.
So just super excited about the work that they're doing in Watson, and I think you're going to see some synergy in what you heard today with what we're going to hear next month when we address some similar partnerships that Appalachian State University is doing with their partner districts. So just some really great things that are happening across the state in collaboration with our EPPs. Okay, so shifting back to the Teacher Leadership Council, as you heard last month, we had a working group around some of the recruitment and retention issues that those groups are working on. This month, we're looking specifically at what the beginning teacher work group is. And this work group has spent the last 6 months really looking at strategies that can be implemented or that are being implemented in other states, as well as what we're doing here in this state, and try to come up with some suggestions that they feel really passionately about. I've highlighted some of those here. And one of the things that they really wanted to look at was that teachers who do not have proper mentoring and other supports throughout their time as a beginning teacher, they leave the classroom or they leave the profession at 2 times the rate of those who do. So that beginning support and that mentorship is crucial. And so the 4 big things that really stood out to me in the report that they gave to me was they wanted some increased flexibility in the mentor selection criteria, and that does lie in board policy. So that could definitely be something that this board could look at if they were interested. That there should be enhanced mentor training and support for the mentors themselves. That there should be a limit to of the mentor-mentee ratio. And while I know that there's that shifts from district to district, that is something that they looked at, as well as legislative changes or grant opportunities to attract and support beginning teachers, AKA higher salaries for everybody. Go team. So they, some of the things that, they also have a list of legislative policy suggestions that this board doesn't necessarily have under its purview, but some things that we heard about earlier today that I think both Kim and Leah talked about were loan forgiveness programs and financial aid in order to reduce that debt when they come out of their classroom and into their new classroom, as well as targeted support for shortage areas, and clear, let me say this very clearly, clear career advancement opportunities, that career advancement and to be able to stay in the classroom was highly important in the research that they had. And then some, just to sum up some examples that other states do, definite salary increases, loan forgiveness programs, teacher housing initiatives, tuition-free pathways to teaching, and then innovative things that our teacher prep programs are doing in order to try to reimagine what teacher prep looks like, specifically internship and apprenticeship programs where teachers could, or future teachers or prospective teachers could get that learning that they get at the EPP under the EPP supervision, but in an actual classroom as a paid apprenticeship. That is my report for this month. I'm happy to take any questions or comments.
Thank you very much. I don't think we have time for questions.
Great.
Unless there's a burning one. We are 15 minutes over. Thank you, you may.
Is it possible that we could get the results of the survey of the stayers? You said reason, I mean, you gave us those 5 bullet points, but what did you actually learn from them? And I don't mean right now, just could you?
Yeah, we have an executive summary that I can send to Mr. Fafario, and he can send it to you. So, take a look.
Very good information. Thank you so much. That concludes my report for this month.
Thank you, Dr. Oxendine. We'll now move to the Business Operations Committee led by Vice Chair Alan Duncan. Vice Chair Duncan.
Yes, thank you, Chair Davis. Along with John Blackburn, we lead the Business Operations Committee. Struck that there used to be a television show that lasted for decades called ABC's Wide World of Sports, in which you delved upon the sports all over the world. And I'm struck by in this meeting and several previous with our committee, as boring as we are, we do have a wide, we can't give the world, but we got a wide display of how deep the breadth is of the department that does so many different things. And you'll see that again today in the meeting. But you start thinking about the different functions people report to us on. It is all over the lot in this committee. So with that, we start on action of first read. We have 5 of those. And our first one is, we have a number of contracts, which we will do the 2-minute drill on. The first one is the CrowdStrike endpoint protection licenses. These are, of course, cybersecurity issues. Tim Weiss from Risk Management and Cybersecurity for the department is here for the first 2-minute drill.
Good afternoon. Thank you. This is for the renewal of our CrowdStrike license, the contract, a 1-year renewal for a CrowdStrike license utilizing a convenience contract from DIT in the amount of $2,853,500. And this renewal will allow us to continue utilizing the 200,000 licenses that we currently have deployed for endpoint protection on PSU servers and endpoints. And CrowdStrike's a next generation antivirus solution that provides protection to the protected solutions from malware and other malicious activities in our PSUs.
Thank you. Very important work that you do. Any questions about this contract? Tim, thank you.
Thank
I think
you.
it's your first appearance. Glad to have you here. Our second contract is for North Carolina Association of School Business Officials, otherwise fondly referred to as NC-ASBO. Jennifer Bennett, who is our Senior School Business Administrator, is here to give us a brief report within the 2-minute drill on this.
Yes, good afternoon. The NC-ASBO contract, as we call it, this is for the 1-year extension allowed under the original appropriation, the $2.2 million. This group is partnering with us to increase the business operations aspect out in the school districts. We have mentors out working with any finance officer with less than 3 years experience has a full-time mentor helping them work through things. They've been able to provide triage support for some of the school districts that have experienced some turnover recently, as well as partnering with those superintendents to vet candidates for and helping them interview for finance officers, provide those triage services. Who can they call? Who's available to help? Who can they contract with? We are moving into helping the HR directors as well. That's been a request from the superintendents. They have HR support in several LEAs, and we'll be expanding that joint partnership with the HR world. And they're also working with Jack Hoke and the superintendent's group to expand PD related to HR and finance to the superintendent's group, and are working on getting that developed in this next year. So we feel it's been a very strong contract to help support our public schools, and it continues to grow and expand.
This contract's been very important in the past and to help a number of districts, and look forward to having that continue in the future. Jennifer, thank you for all your work on that. Our third contract is with UNCG Serve. It's a homeless, part of the 2024 homeless ARP funds. Alex Charles, our Senior Director from the Office of Federal Programs, is here to report on this contract. Welcome.
All right, good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
So this is for the NC ARP homeless contract. So this is, we had one in place, but it ended, so this is going to continue us out through the end of ARP. So ARP is ESSER funds, so they will be coming to an end this upcoming fall, winter. So this is our contract that will get us through that time period. And so the main points of this contract is they're going to be focused on data collection. Don't know if you're aware of it, but last year we identified over 34,000 students experiencing homelessness within our state. So with that, there's just a high need for just being able to track that data, so we know the numbers, we know the supports, and we know what needs are out there. This is also a big emphasis on providing training and technical assistance to our PSUs on building that capacity for how do we serve this vulnerable population. Also looking at how do we monitor our grant recipients, doing some policy review and advisement, as well as reporting and grants administration. So again, these are ESSER funds. This is going to be extending that out through the Serve Center at UNCG. And again, I said these funds are expiring later on this year. We are looking at what opportunities lay out there to help fill some of this gap as these expire. Right now, we've not identified any to fill this gap, so we do know there's going to be a gap in some of the supports as we sort of close this out. But we are actively looking for those and trying to fill the gap as much as possible. So are there any questions?
Please keep us advised on filling the gap. Helping and serving our homeless students is a very important priority of this board, so we're very much engaged in the work that you're doing on this. And thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you.
For the report on this. Glad we have this funding. Our next contract is for the Carolina Thomas bus. This is part of the Clean School 2022 school bus replacement. It comes as part of the Volkswagen settlement, the class action, the money that went to the state. These are our electric buses. Kevin Harrison, who's our Director of School Transportation, is here to report on the opportunity for these two buses.
So last summer, this was part of a grant award from the Division of Environmental Quality. We got this last summer, was the original purchase order. We had a district that wished to reduce their participation a little bit. They wished to move from 5 to 3, so that gave us 2 buses that we needed to reallocate. Elsewhere, there was another county that was interested, and we are essentially now procuring those buses. This is that procurement for 2 electric school buses for Cumberland County Schools, totaling $794,000 or so. Electric school buses currently in the state, there are 5 to, now about 8 on the ground, but most of them have only been on the ground a handful of months, 2 or 3 months. The longest one in operation is with Randolph County Public Schools, and they've had it for about a year now, a little over a year they've had it. So far, they have reported that it has been very successful for them. They have indicated that there was, the most trouble they've had is related to the charger, but they said key to that is having a good electric company partner, and they do in the Randolph Electric Cooperatives.
All right, thank you, Kevin. Any questions? A little known fact is one of our senior people in the department, Dr. Jeremy Gibbs, has actually driven an electric school bus. So we have department experience here. Kevin, thank you.
Thank you.
Our next contract, Dr. Rob Dietrich is here for the next 2, in fact. The first one is the Canvas Learning Management System contract, and then he'll further report on the International Society for Technology and Education membership. Welcome.
Good afternoon. Thank you for having me today. I'm here today to discuss the first contract, which is a renewal extension for the Canvas Learning Management System with Instructure due to state convenience price. This is a 2-year extension through 24-25, 25-26, as well as an optional year through 26-27, and offers it at a price of $4.16 for PSUs statewide. And currently we have over 800,000 users that are currently using that across the state.
Any questions on that one? All right. Let's go to the International Society for Technology and Education, or ISTE.
This is ISTE, as just been described as the International Society for Technology and Education. This is the last year of an optional year in our first 3 years with them, and it is for $207,000. And what that encompasses is that every certified teacher in the state of North Carolina gets ISTE membership, which provides them access to all the professional development as well as topic guides that are being developed with North Carolina in mind, as well as we've also been providing ISTE certification, which is worth 4 grad credits to teachers who want to go after that certification, and that helps them make sure that they are properly using the digital resources they have in the classroom to engage that student learning that we have.
Thank you, Dr. DJ. Any questions? Very good.
Okay.
All right, these 6 contracts will be up for approval when we vote tomorrow. BizOp 2 is the 2023-24 Health Career Promotions Grant Awards. Trey Michael, who's our Senior Director of CTE, is here to report on these awards. So
Thank you very much. Good afternoon.
Since it's not a contract, you get more than 2 minutes, you get 4.
Oh, but I did promise you the 90-second version to speed it up, so if that's okay. Great, great. So you see before you the statutory reference. This past year's budget, the General Assembly did appropriate $1 million each of the 2 years of the biennium. And the text was exactly what you see on the screen: to support public school units in developing a comprehensive promotion plan for health careers to high school students and their families. That's what we had to work with. We were very fortunate that Alexis and her team were gracious enough to help us frame out what this could look like, what the chart of accounts could look like, and how we could support the schools in reaching the intent of the law. So where we landed was the maximum award was $25,000 per PSU. Funds available until expended, which is a unique thing for us, that they have a lot of time to spend those dollars. Now, if you looked at the list of awardees that we have proposed, which I believe there are 33 for about $657,000, not every district applied for the full $25,000. Some of them simply applied for $8,000 because that was their need, and that's what they did at the time. Priority would be given to PSUs with workforce demand. That was there in case we had more requests than we had funds available. As it happened for this year, we did not. And oddly enough, every PSU has a workforce demand in the healthcare industry. So that would have been an interesting and unique situation to kind of discern between those. Funds are not to be used on equipment or on the salary of personnel during the school day, but they could have some after-school duties. Some examples of some of the events that we had proposed: health, career fairs, and expos with local businesses, which we certainly like to see local businesses being involved in school activities, summer camps, workshops, pathway promotion events, and so forth. I did include some numbers. Thank you, sir. We did attach the list of recommended awardees for 23-24. 33 PSUs. Average request was around $20,000. Total amount $657,875. Remaining balance for round 2, which we will start in May of 2024, is just over $1.3 million, and we do plan to push this with the new knowledge that these funds will not expire. I think that will encourage a lot more to do something with these funds and apply moving forward so that we can get that money out to schools.
All right, very good. Any questions? This was a challenge to come up with a good framework for the money because it was not as clearly defined as often the district transactions are, but this one was not. So thank you for that, and I don't know if there's any questions about it.
Just a quick question, if I may. So is this a new source of money?
So I do not recall the source of money that it came from. I believe it was some expired funds from another initiative, and because of that, they appropriated it to us to use.
Sounds good.
Yeah. Love it when that happens.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Biz Op 3 is approval of recommendations for additional after-school robotics program funding. Dr. Charles Aiken, our section chief for mathematics and science, is here to report on this. This is further funding for what has been a very attractive and popular after-school robotics program in our schools.
Since he only used 90 seconds, do I get his time for mine? Well,
He went over.
oh, he did. Okay, I was trying to keep it, but so good afternoon, board member, Superintendent Truitt. I am excited and, in fact, very appreciative to be able to be here with additional recommendations for our after-school robotics program. Just a quick reminder: so the original grant came through from the recent budget from the General Assembly, providing $1 million for after-school robotics. However, in the application window, we received 46 applications that totaled a little over $2 million. So with much appreciation and thanks, I do want to thank the department leadership, Superintendent Truitt, and the board, which last month agreed to reallocate some funds from one of the pots that we had not used that was specifically for after-school programs, and actually reallocated that to this specific program. And with that, we were able to go back and review the applications that we had received and come forward to today. The next several slides just kind of recap some of the information that was shared in February regarding the timeline once the budget was passed. The process that we used for the request for proposal, these applications that we reviewed the second go-around were ones that had been through that process and were reviewed with the same level of expectations. We can probably go through the next couple, just a reminder if they chose to use a partner, how that had to come up with, budget requirements that maintained for these applications just as much as the first round. I did want to stop here for just a second and mention the review process. So in February, the board approved 22 of the applications for right at $1 million. Today, we would bring forward 23. There was one LEA that has decided to withdraw their application. So we were at 46. The total that we'll be requesting is 45. I just sort of want to make that note in case anybody noticed a few of the numbers didn't quite add up. I think we can probably keep going. The same targeted areas for consideration were in place for these as well. In terms of the recommendations, I just kind of want to note the total, but also that within these additional ones, we do have all 8 state board regions represented, and it's 15 LEAs and 8 charter schools who were included in the process. I think we can probably move forward. I know that we always kind of like to take a look at how this is being distributed across the state, so just wanted to note that all 8 regions were included. And then we always kind of like to show a visual of the distribution across the state. And we're going to come back to something similar to this in a moment. But these are just the ones for this particular set of 23. But again, you see them spread throughout. And then the next several slides list for you some of each of the specific PSUs, their location, and the amounts. So we can probably move through these. I think we keep going. I did want to just beg a little bit of time. So we took a moment to kind of look back at what would it look like when you take these 2 sets of allocations and recommendations together. Earlier with the conversations about what keeps teachers in the profession, another one that I will put forward is an opportunity to work with students about things that the students and they as a staff member are exceptionally passionate about. And Vice Chair, as you mentioned, this is something that as we hear from the field, this is something that our students are passionate about. We know it's a workforce development opportunity. We know it's a durable skills opportunity, but it's something that a lot of our teachers and staff really are excited and interested in. And so just to kind of give you a sense of what together this has been able to do, the next slide shows the total funding and distribution, and you see kind of how it's been spread out through the entire state. And what this is going to be able to do. And then I think the next slide is probably the one that I'm most excited to share with you. But each of those pins represents just this particular round. This does not include the round that we were able to do following the budget cycle in 22 through 24. But each one of those pins is a team that has been able to participate in robotics competitions. There's actually another statewide one if you have an opportunity at ECU this weekend. I actually talked to a district just early last week that's going to be able to send their students from the other side of the state all the way to ECU to participate in this as a state level competition that would not occur if this was something that we weren't able to do. So on behalf of all of them, I certainly want to pass that thanks on to you. But that just kind of gives you a sense of what we've been able to do between February and hopefully with these recommendations. So I don't know if I did as good as Trey did, but
You did a great
can
job.
stop and take any questions.
And you both did. Any questions for Dr. Aiken? Yes. Ms.
How
Campbell.
long does this funding cover?
So this robotics funding is from ESSER 3, so they will have until September 30th to spend it off their books, and they have to have completed the usage of it by December 30th. So it is quick. But that was something that the applicants knew originally, and so a lot of them had already made some adjustments and had made some plans for how to make that happen with either what their original visions were or in working with something they could try to do with local funds in some way to support it.
So then they'll have to, if they're gonna continue the program.
After this, we will need additional supports for funding. Yes, ma'am.
That timeline's also why Dr. Aiken and his colleagues worked so fast to turn around this next set of recommendations so they'd have the maximum amount of time. Dr. Eisenstein.
Thank you so much. Just a quick question, maybe in your PowerPoint that we're looking at. Anyway, the teams are composed of high school?
They can cover the full branch, actually. I can share with you, we just completed the report a month before last for the General Assembly, but we actually have teams from elementary, middle, and high school. We actually have more elementary teams than I think that people tend to imagine. One of the things that we really tried to stress was building that feeder pattern, so we didn't always just want to see high school. A lot of times, it's a late in the game if you're really going to build that STEM interest for students. So we try to look for, do they have a middle school vision? Do they have an elementary vision? So actually it's all up and down K-12.
And is there a partnership opportunity with, let's say, business industry?
That is something that we try to push in the applications. If they use a vendor, the legislation outlines some very specific things that had to be. But in terms of working with business and industries in the community, that is an excellent opportunity to keep it going. And a lot do. Some have more opportunities based on their local communities than others.
Very good. Thank you.
And I'll say that through this, our elementary schools were able to compete over the past 2 years, and it's been beautiful. It's something that our teachers, some of them already had a passion for, and to be able to fund that after school. And our elementary schools competed with the middle schools, and some of those, I mean, they beat the middle schools to
That's
go
awesome.
into, and so it's really been something we're excited to continue and have been glad to be able, through this funding, to expand into our elementary schools.
I love hearing that. Thank you. That's awesome.
Anyone else? Thank you, Dr. A.
Thanks, sir.
Our next item is Biz Op 4. This is a policy amendment for the allotment manual. We keep thinking we're through all of these, and we can't seem to run out. So Jennifer Bennett, our Senior Director of Financial Business Services, has 3 more of them for us.
Yeah, here we go. I think I just need to have a standing item on the agenda, unfortunately. But these are quick today. We have a change to a state PRC 257 for middle school reading. It's a fixed pot of money, and with the ADM change, we have to change the funding factor to distribute 100% of the money and stay within budget. We have 2 federal grant revisions, PRC 110, the 21st Century Funds. That's really just increasing the maximum allowable from 400 to 500. And PRC 115 is school improvement funds under Title I, and that's been expanded and broadened to allow flexibility to allow federal programs group to use those funds also to for targeted support and improvement schools, along with the comprehensive support they already provide under that program.
Any questions or comments?
Nope.
No? All right,
Okay.
well, don't go away.
Nope, I'm next.
And I don't know if Alex is going to join you or not, but our next item, Biz Op 5, our last of our action items, is a report to the General Assembly on the ARP ESSER Fund Expenditure Compliance report. So,
This is an annual report. Alex is here if we have questions, but for the General Assembly's version of the report, they really just want to know, did we do the 90%, 10% split appropriately, which we have, and we have with Fidelity. So for their report, and there's no real change. As you will recall, within the funds that we have under our purview to execute, last March, we brought you some of those changes so that we can make sure that we're maximizing those resources and getting them spent as efficiently as possible. We also provide all of our ESSER's funding every month. When we get the expenditure data from the PSUs is populated on our Financial Business Services website with those monthly expenditures. And so the report really reflects a point in time of that, but we update that every month for everybody. So everybody understands where we're at every point in this process until these funds are fully executed.
there's a lot of ESSER reports that are very complicated. This one is not particularly complicated by contrast, so.
Yeah, this is one of our nice and easy reports.
All right, any questions for Jennifer? Thank you very much.
Sure.
Our last 2 items are executed contract reports and planned contracts reports, and then also the monthly budget report. Have not had any questions on any of those, so not having had any this month, I think that completes our report. With thanks to the staff that spans the wide world of the department to provide all the different and helpful information. Chair Davis.
Thank you. That concludes our discussions for today. We will now move into closed session. After closed, we will not be returning to open session, but we will be back tomorrow, Thursday, March 4th, promptly at 9 a.m. This time I request a motion to go into closed session. Vice Chair Duncan. In fact, I did because it's right here in front of me. It should be April 4th, excuse me. Thanks for the catch.
I move that we go into closed session pursuant to North Carolina General Statute, section 143-318.11A1, 3, and 6. And to prevent the disclosure of information that is privileged or confidential pursuant to North Carolina General Statute, sections 115C-319 and -321, and 132-6.1C at sec. 143-129.8D and 147-64.6D. To consider the qualifications, competence, performance, or conditions of appointment of public officers or employees or prospective public officers or employees, and to consult with our attorneys in order to preserve the attorney-client privilege between the attorneys and the public body, including a discussion of the following pending cases: Phillips versus NCDPI, Miller versus NCDPI, and Ponte versus NCSBE.
Motion by Vice Chair Duncan, second by Mr. Keenan. Mr. Foforia?
Dr. Oxendine?
Yes.
Ms. Kamens?
Yes.
Mr. Keenan?
Yes.
Mr. Hall?
Yes.
Dr. Tipton Rogers? Mr. Blackburn?
Yes.
Ms. Moore?
Yes.
Treasurer Falwell? Treasurer Falwell? Lieutenant Governor Robinson? Vice Chair Duncan?
Yes.
Chair Davis?
Yes. Motion carries. Let's be enclosed at 4:25. 4:25. See you in the morning.